Bowitting. Bowitting is the home of Garden River First Nation, Wachewana First Nation, the historic Sault Ste. Marie Métis Council. It's also the head office of Missinaibi Cree First Nation. Madam Clerk.
Under agenda item 2, adoption of minutes, I have a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Councillor Hollingsworth isn't here. I'll pursue Councillor Christian. Resolved that the minutes of regular meeting of July 11, 2022 be approved.
All in favor? Carried.
And under agenda item 4, declaration of pecuniary interest, I have Councillor Hilsinger declaring with respect to the Sault College long-term lease as she's an employee of Sault College, and also with respect to the short-term rental as she's an employee of the Water Tower Inn.
Anything else, Council? See none.
Under agenda item 5, a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Christian resolved that the agenda and addendum number 1 for August 8, 2022 City Council meeting as presented be approved.
All in favor? Carried. Before we proceed, Madam Clerk, I just want to acknowledge 2 things. We have a new employee with us tonight, Mr. Facey, who is in our finance department. Welcome to your first meeting, sir. He's a Siouxite that was living in Sudbury and working for the city of Greater Sudbury, and we got him back here, so that's a +1 for us, and we're happy about that. I also want to just acknowledge and recognize people being back in the council chamber. Very nice to see all the attendees, and I thank you for caring enough to show up to our meetings and to participate in them. Madam Clerk, we can move on to item 6.
Under agenda item 6.1, voter engagement, Gabrielle Nicholson, election coordinator, and Noah Edwards and Avery Marsh, summer students with the clerk's department, are in attendance.
Welcome to council.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Gabrielle Nicholson, election coordinator with the City of Sault Ste. Marie. And with me are Noah and Avery, students who are assisting us with the voter engagement initiatives this summer. Throughout the past few months, our team has been working to ensure residents can exercise their democratic right to vote and that they know how. This presentation will provide an update on our voter engagement efforts so far and what's next. So we have created a variety of promotion materials we've been handing out. We have business cards that people can write information on, stickers, bookmarks we've been handing out at the library, signage like table tents we've been putting around public areas, and we have also dedicated city web pages about the election. These are our notepads and pens we've been handing out around at our voter pop-ups. Those are our vote swag that Noah and I have been wearing, so we're easily identifiable. So these are examples of our voter materials that we put out in the public. This is at the North Branch Library. We put up our little tabletop tents as well as bookmarks that people can grab when they're taking books. And these are our tabletop tents and posters we have around the City Hall, at the public areas where people can just take a look while they're waiting for their appointments, as well as a TV monitor that people can see for election information.
We've also attended various community events such as Summer Moon Festival, Poutine Feast, Rotary Fest, and Marconi Meets World with our voter engagement pop-up. We had a tablet with us that was able to look up people's ward information or checking their voter registration. At Rotary Fest, we also included a future voters mock election to get children involved in voting, while also allowing us to provide information to caregivers while their children are voting. We asked children 4 fun questions on the ballot, such as their favorite summer activity. We also gave out future voter stickers to all children who participated. We had over 50 future voters participate, and the results were posted on our social media following the event. And we found out that a majority of future voters who participated enjoy swimming. At Rotary Fest and Marconi Meets World, we also had a free draw for people to enter to win a city branded t-shirt, hat, water bottle, and tote bag. Overall, we spoke to over 350 people over the 4 pop-ups, plus thousands of people walked past and saw the booth.
What's next? Liaise with the Accessibility Advisory Committee on voting location feedback and providing an accessible vote tabulator demonstration. Continue to attend community events such as orientation at Algoma University and Sault College and any candidate forums. Voters list revisions, encouraging people to revise their voter information, adding and updating their information. Social media for key election milestones, where, when, and how to vote, voter lookup, voter identification requirements, alternative voting methods, and advanced vote dates. Social media for key election milestones, as I said. Traditional media ads, such as radio, billboards, print, posters, newspapers, and inserts. We will also have ads on city buses and at the Greyhound game Jumbotron before Election Day. Postcard mailouts to historically low turnout areas. Voting how-to videos, informational videos to explain what's new and remind people how to vote. And strategic voting locations, taking into consideration various factors such as transit and walking access, feedback from 2018, and accessibility. We are providing many different voting options, including on voting day, October 24th from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. at assigned voting location, advanced vote days with enhanced accessibility services on October 8th, 12th, and 15th at City Hall, proxy voting, home visit voting, and register to vote by mail. There will also be free transit and parabus services on voting day and advanced vote days with presentation of a voter notification card. Candidate nominations close August 19th at 2 p.m. Information for potential candidates can be found on the city's website. The Compliance Audit Committee application also closes on the 19th for those interested. Today, we also launched the election employment applications, and they can be found on the city's website. For more information about the election, please visit saultstemarie.ca/election 2022. Make your plan to vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your work. It's important, and we would encourage everybody to visit the city website and make your plan to vote. So I think there are some questions from council. We'll start with Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Well done. I mean, I enjoyed going through your presentation at home. And I guess I have a question, and I don't know if it's to you or to our city clerk, but these pieces, are we as councillors able to get a small supply and hand them out to our constituents before the vote? And second question, can candidates ask for some supply, and can they hand them out to encourage a better voting?
Yes, they can.
Okay.
We'd encourage it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, council? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Council, I believe that brings us to the consent agenda. Matters on the consent agenda. Councillor Gardy? Actually, Councillor Gardy, before you start, I had one I wanted to recognize. I apologize. I do want to recognize the Kiwanis Club of Lakeshore Foundation. There's a significant report on our agenda, and we, as everybody's aware, we're improving the park at Rosedale, and significant donations came in from the Kiwanis Club, and we needed additional resources, and another donation of $75,500 came in from the Kiwanis Club Lakeshore Foundation. So we had a donation of $80,000 from the Kiwanis Club of Lakeshore. We had a donation of $50,000 from Child Care Algoma. We had a donation of $10,000 from the Kiwanis Club of Sault Ste. Marie. And now we have another donation of $75,500 from the Kiwanis Club of Lakeshore Foundation. So that's a tremendous amount of support. So I just want to recognize and thank them for that support. So go ahead, Councillor Gardy. What number were you looking to speak to?
That's a good question. I lost it here. 7.15, Mr. Mayor, please.
Okay, 7.15, two-year capital transportation program.
Okay, through you to, I think it would be Mr. Romeo. Carl, just a couple of questions. One, the second line resurfacing is going to commence this year, correct? And if so, will it continue next construction season? Second line west.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy. Second line resurfacing is funded by the NORDS fund, which was announced earlier this year.
Yeah.
So we have $800,000. The treasurer can correct me if I'm wrong for this year's project. So that I think that gets us most of the way between Cora and Gooley Avenue, and then the next 2 or 3 years after, we have an additional $400,000 per year. I can't recall if it's 3. So yes, we'll be continuing on with second line up to Allen Side Road and then down Allen Side Road. It's to work on that corridor that services Aroko. That program is to be directed to natural resource sector.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that there isn't a heck of a lot of time left in this construction season, but it's nice to see that it'll be getting started at least this year. And then secondly, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Rumio, Wallace Terrace, will it commence next season and hopefully be completed in 2024? Are there plans for that? Could you speak to that at all?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy. So our resurfacing program is set every spring, and generally we have some key arteries that are our next priorities that are in the queue. But we do evaluate them all in the spring because needs change over the course of our harsh winter. But I can say that Wallace Terrace is our next one of our next highest priorities.
Perfect, because it's in pretty rough shape, especially the most westerly portion. So I know a lot of residents and businesses will appreciate that.
We will be giving very strong consideration for that road next year.
Much appreciated. That's it for 715, Mr. Mayor.
Does anybody else have anything on 715? Councillor Hollingsworth, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. To Carl. For the viewers at home, can you just, again, describe your scoring system? I think using this as an opportunity to educate individuals on how you score roads. Can you explain that further?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. We're right at the end of the current system that we have. We use our road management system, which classifies roads based on scores that we would, we scored them in the engineering division by driving them every 2 years. So that they'd get a score of 100 and would fit them into a adequate category, or 5 to 10 years needing reconstruction or resurfacing, or 1 to 5 years, or deficient now. So those 4 categories. So basically they're scored based on criteria from the underground infrastructure like sanitary sewer, water main breaks, rideability, road structure, curb condition.
Okay, fine. And so I think you said you're at the end of the 2 years. So does that mean starting next year, you're going to drive all the roads again? Is that my understanding?
No, what I meant by that was that we are just about complete the corporate asset management plan for linear infrastructure,
right?
Which we have a consultant report that is being finalized right now, and that will be used to educate us on prioritize which roads will be done next going forward.
Okay. And 2 other questions. So will the scoring system in the future be altered, or will you still stay with this type of scoring system?
So we've moved to a pavement index, pavement condition index, PCI numbers, which is more in line with the MTO way of doing it. So the consultant who did this project has done the initial scoring of all the roads, and I think that cycle would be every 2 to 5 years, the PCI number would be updated.
Okay. So the PCI number that's going to be updated, does that mean that the projects are listed for 2024 may be changed, knowing that you may have a new information?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, we did this in a 2-year plan. So 2023 is what we're going to move forward with, planning for next year. Going forward, we're going to work on a 5-year plan, and we'll roll that forward every year. So next year, yes, you'll be getting earlier than this, maybe in June or so next year, you'll be getting a 5-year capital plan, and then we'll be redoing that every year. So we'll always be looking at the next year, and yes, things will be maybe reprioritized based on how they behave over winters and they deteriorate faster than others.
Right. And I think it was last year or the previous year, you had extra funds left over for some small resurfacing. And can you say, you probably really can't hopefully there'll be some extra funds left over for some small resurfacing. Can you see that happening? For example, in Ward 1, you were kind enough to resurface one part of Queen a couple of years ago because you had some extra funds left over. Is that a possibility for this year?
For this year, at this time, the resurfacing program is set. The contracts are out. The contractors, we have
Okay.
two projects or two contracts that are currently underway. So not likely going to be adding small sections of roads, but we when we find out through the capital budgeting process how much money we have for resurfacing, we try to fit in some smaller roads, not just the main arteries as well, to try to balance the needs of all the road types.
Okay. And a final question, constituents, if they email you directly, if they think their road is basically not passable, can they email you to have you come and look at the road, or what can we say to constituents?
Certainly, they can contact the engineering division. We deal with all inquiries and treat everyone the same.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Bruni, did you have a question on 715? Go ahead.
Just a quick question regarding the various roads. When you have various roads in the 2023 and 2024 transportation program, is that basically resurfacing and not reconstruction?
So I'm just trying to look where you're reading.
It's the last page where it says all the capital transportation program jobs are going to be.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Bruni, you're looking at the resurfacing paragraph. So yeah, we don't
No,
know.
the various roads. It says 2023 various roads.
Yep.
And
Resurfacing dash various roads.
Yeah, so that's mostly resurfacing and not reconstruction of roads.
Correct. That is our resurfacing program, which we set in the spring. After we go through winter, some roads may rise above others. The needs just they deteriorate faster. So we'll set that program in the spring. That's why we use the vague language of various roads.
Yeah, okay.
But as I mentioned to Councilor Gardy's question, Wallace Terrace is a very high priority for resurfacing for next year.
Would we get a list of these roads in the springtime? Or council, would they get a list of which roads are going to be resurfaced?
The 2023 resurfacing program will be brought to council with a proposed
With the
program.
list. Okay. Thanks.
Anybody else at 715? I should note for the record that we had a request to speak without notice from a citizen on this matter, but I don't see the citizen present, so just wanted to acknowledge that for the record. Councilor Gardy, do you have any other matters on the consent agenda? I think you raised at 720 and 721.
Yeah, excuse me, I just all of a sudden lost my voice here. 7.20, the salvage yard licensing bylaw.
Go ahead.
So this originally emanated from some significant concern that Councillor Scott and I received from residents in the area in close proximity and not so close proximity to the operation AIM has. They took over operation, and to my understanding, they seem to have expanded their footprint and their operations beyond what the former business had undertook. The complaints included noise, vibration, along with hours of operation. Now, in reading the report, I didn't notice anything as it related to hours of operation, though I stand to be corrected. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to I think Mr. King, could you speak to if hours of operation can be considered or going to be considered?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy.
Oh, sorry.
Mr. King's not here
No, I'm
today,
sorry.
but I'll answer that for you. I think he did reference that there will be a change, or they're going to look at the change for the hours of operation as well.
Okay. I think ideally, through what I hear from the 5 or 6 property owners who are pretty consistent in vocalizing their concerns, that consideration of the former operating hours of the previous operation, from 8 to 4:30 weekdays and from 8 to 12 noon, would be kind of recommended from their end of things. I understand as to why, so I'm hoping some strong consideration could be given to those parameters. Thanks, Mr. Field.
Okay, I have a list here for 7:20. So we have Councillor Gardy, Councillor Shoemaker.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm copied on a number of these emails that Councillor Gardy and Councillor Scott are getting, as is much of our staff. They're really directed at the Ministry of Parks, Environment, Conservation and Parks, MECP. And we haven't had, at least to my knowledge, as much comfort in their responses as I would hope that the neighbors in that area can get. So the report talks about, if this environmental activity and sector registry isn't sufficient to reduce the concerns, then a full environmental compliance approval will be required to continue operations at the site. In my opinion, that is going to be needed, just based on the frequency of complaints that we received. We've received 3 in the last 5 days on the level of noise coming from Ames operations, and seemingly without regard for the neighbors in the area and their ability to enjoy their property. So not sure if we can convey to the ministry a preference, but certainly just from my perspective, a full ECA would be what I would want to see the Ministry of Environment undertake on this site.
Thank you, Councillor Shoemaker. Councillor Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have several friends in the area, and I too was copied in on many of the emails. I don't have any questions. I just want to support what Councillor Gardy and Councillor Shoemaker are saying, and that any procedures, licensing requirements that we have put a limit on hours. These are very loud operations, very unfair to the neighborhoods. Yes, we need these types of facilities in light of what's happening in Algoma Steel, but I think we need to strike a balance here. So I'm hoping that there's strict adherence to hours of operation. I hope there's a fine component to this, and I hope we put together a process that expedites any violation processing that we need to do, because we need them. But I think we can't have these running away on us. So I support what my fellow councillors are suggesting. Thank you.
On the same matter, Councillor. Go ahead, Councillor Helslinger.
Thank you. So this is reminding me of another place in my ward and Matthew's ward, where there's also been this issue of noise and around businesses operating of this kind. And I know I've been told many times now, the efforts to control this are to be, and it's something that confuses me somewhat, but complaint driven. So unless someone at the time, at the moment, actually sees or hears and can report that specific, with evidence, that there's very little opportunity to move ahead on managing these types of things. So perhaps in addition to this idea of this particular location we're talking about, perhaps whomever is going to work on this could look at it a little bit more holistically and how we could help residents. Because I know I've heard from this one particular group, and they're just beside themselves, and I feel completely hopeless into how I can help them, short of going there in the middle of the night and parking my car and waiting in case something happens. So just throw that comment in there. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else in 720? Thank you. Councillor Gardy, 721.
Yeah, 721. Thanks. I'm glad to see the report come back. I appreciate the amount of work that went into it, and I thank all the staff that worked on it. It's the short-term rental information report, for those of you who are wondering. As we can see in the report, the Airbnb type accommodations are growing year over year. At least they were. I'm sure they continue to be. It'll be nice for the municipality to begin to collect some revenue from the mat tax that the hosts will have to charge on the rental. I do have one concern specifically about those properties that are rented in areas in our community along the water. And I'm personally of the opinion that there should be a minimum number of nights one of these properties can be rented to kind of reduce the transience of them. I suggest that these types of properties, more quote unquote recreational areas, if you want to call them that, are different from those in the city proper. And personally, I'd like consideration given, and I propose that not less than 14 days that those properties can be rented for. As I mentioned, they're most popular in the spring and summer. They're often more conducive to recreation along with gatherings and parties, considering the time of year, often outside. These factors make neighboring property owners have to deal with issues that may not necessarily be as prevalent in more traditional residential neighborhoods. So I'm hopeful that when we receive the report, that consideration will have been given to a minimum number of night stays at those types of properties. In fact, my question is, I guess, is that a possibility? Could those types of properties be kind of sectioned off from the rest of the community? So through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess I have a question to
The city solicitor.
City solicitor.
Go ahead, Mr. Fields. The question is, can you, in the bylaw, require there be a minimum night stay for a specific type of property, as opposed to just generally dealing with transient accommodations?
To you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to ask if Peter Tenazzo can help me with this. He's the gentleman that has been doing the research on this, and I wouldn't be able to answer that off the top of my head.
Mr. Tenazzo?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy. That's not something that I've seen before in the research that we've done. So I don't know that I can give you a definitive answer this evening that we can or can't do it, but I can get back to you with that for sure.
I would really appreciate that. Thanks, Karen.
Okay.
And, Mr. Keith.
Can anybody else in 721? Okay, so yeah, sorry, Councillor Nero had his hand up, and then we'll go to you, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Tenazzo. Mr. Tenazzo, in your report of July 12th of 21, you note under principal residence that all municipalities with regulations require the STR to be the host's principal resident. But yet in your report of today, on page 4, states the proposed zoning regulations have been revised to remove the requirements that an STR be a host's primary dwelling. Could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, that's a direct result of the public consultation. And by and large, as as noted in this report, there's only been a handful of complaints really based upon 3 or 4 properties. And that's out of plus or minus about 65 STRs that have been operating in the Sioux and by and large have been respectful of their neighbors and their neighborhoods. So as a result of the consultation, really what we heard from current hosts was that, requiring this to be their primary dwelling would effectively put them out of business. So given that we only have a handful of complaints based upon the total number of STRs that operate quite well, we felt that it would be appropriate to remove that requirement.
Okay. All right, but I guess this will, through public consultation, this probably will be rehashed a little more. My second question relates to page 5 of your report. Paragraphs that deal with circumstances where licenses will not be issued and circumstances where existing licenses can be revoked. My question is with regards to the amount of vacant properties that recently have been viewed in the city. It states that circumstances where licenses will not be issued, a requirement is that units are building and fire code compliant. Does that also include building minimum standards and yard maintenance bylaws?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, I'm not sure that we contemplated yard maintenance, but certainly building code, fire code would be applicable. If there's any outstanding orders, those orders would have to be remedied before a license could be issued. I would think that going forward from a property standards standpoint, enforcement would proceed on the basis that it would proceed on any other property, whether it's an STR or a rental or a commercial property.
And I guess that's the point that I would like to discuss further. Seeing as the homes are vacant, the properties are vacant now, would it not be the right thing to do is put these things in place as an item that you have in the bylaw already to control that from happening? I mean, we have a significant list on our tracking system of properties with that are derelict and minimum standards and yard maintenance bylaws. We have a chance here to deal with some vacant properties that potentially could become STRs. Would there be any reason why we could not put those clauses into the bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, I think we could take a look at that and potentially tie a license to the property standards bylaw.
So that we don't have to go through the process. If a property that has applied for an STR and is approved and is after inspected because of a complaint and found to be non-compliant, we're able to act right away by pulling the license. Is that something that can be done?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, that's something we can take a look at. I do note that the complaints that we've received have not, like, we haven't received complaints, property standards complaints with regards to STRs.
Mr. Tenazzo, I get that. I'm dealing with the amount of vacant properties that we have, and that is an ongoing problem right now. And I see this as a way to be proactive in dealing with those properties should they become STRs. Maybe a question from our city solicitor or a comment?
Go ahead, Ms. Fields.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, we can definitely take a look at making that a requirement of the license, so that if they fail to meet the conditions of the requirements of the license will be pulled.
Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Tenazzo.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Thank you. Mayor, this is just a procedural point. If I'm reading this correctly, it says it's moved by Councillor Hilsinger, but I believe she has a conflict. So I believe you need a new mover for this. Is that correct?
That would be correct. So the clerk there's a courtesy mover and seconder, so she'll just swap that out.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
That's all?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Dufour?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. My question is about the host primary residency requirement. I'm happy to see that staff did all of the public consultation. I'm wondering, was most of the attendance for the public consultation STR owners and operators?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, yes. Every attendee to our two virtual open houses were current or potential hosts.
Okay. Was there any staff consideration or discussion at the public consultation of potentially grandfathering current hosts who are in compliance and are paying the MAT tax, and then keeping the host primary residence requirement for future applicants as an STR?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that was brought up, and that is an option. It's not necessarily the fairest option, and I'm not so sure that it's a very low percentage of hosts that are currently paying the MAT tax, and that's not necessarily through their fault. They just may not have known that they had to pay it. So from a fairness standpoint, we decided that this would be the approach to go. Would be to just remove that requirement. Again, because we're only getting a handful of complaints. It's fairly minimal, and the overwhelming majority of short-term rentals are operating appropriately within the neighborhoods that they're in.
Yeah, so I guess where I'm looking at it is kind of trying to see where this market grows in the future. Like you note in your report, the affordability concerns and existing housing stock being taken up by STRs. You know, that it's a very low percentage in Sault Ste. Marie currently, which I do agree with you, the 65 versus 34,000 dwellings. What would be our planning threshold then where we would start to flag a concern that too many of our primary residences were being converted to STRs and going to start affecting affordability and housing availability in Sault Ste. Marie?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not so sure that I could communicate a percent or a threshold for you. This certainly was discussed during the open houses, and I think the hosts that were there, and just, based upon a review of some of the online platforms, I would suggest that the majority of them would not sort of transfer into that affordable market, if you will. But that's not to say that there isn't an impact there. I think what we're looking at here is that right now the situation is manageable, and we feel that the licensing approach will get us the MAT tax. It'll make sure that these units are safe. And then at some point in the future, as these STRs, if they continue to grow, because they do have their positives as well, if they get to a point that there is a problem, we can certainly revisit it in the future.
Okay, so there would be nothing stopping us from adopting a so-called grandfather clause to bring back the primary residency requirement in the future if we so wanted?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, there would be nothing stopping council from doing that.
Okay, and would we be able to ask staff to maybe report back in a certain amount of time after the adoption of this bylaw, like 1 year or something like that, to give us an update on the number of STR applications that we're receiving so that we can just be intentional about looking at that lens of affordability and availability?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, we can certainly include a monitoring piece to the bylaw and come back at some sort of interval to council to give them an update.
Thanks very much, Mr. Tenazzo. I appreciate that Sault Ste. Marie is getting on this early and putting in the infrastructure to deal with it. We've seen a lot in other communities further south, how difficult it can be to start to manage this issue after it's already exploded in growth. So I hope we can keep a close eye on this.
Councillor Duffer, Councillor Scott, you're next on my list here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to see this back, just like Councillor Gardy. We brought this forward a little bit ago, so it's nice to see. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Tenazzo, just a couple of quick questions. You mentioned MPAC said that these properties are subject to a different property code. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? Like, would that impact the overall market value in our favor or negatively for us?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott. Yeah, I think that would generally impact in the city's favor, if you will. There would be a slightly higher tax rate that would be applied to the property.
Perfect. That's great. And then the next question just around the MAT tax collection. It was mentioned some properties are already paying it. So we're good on this, right? Like we already have everything set up to be able to collect this from these STRs. Is it much different from hotels? Does Airbnb support the submission, et cetera?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott. Yeah, I mean, the infrastructure is already set up with the city to do this. Once we get the licensing in place, it'll be a little bit more robust and we can do this. Yes.
And it's not going to be like a major burden on any of the hosts or anything. Not that I'm thinking it should be, but like it's not difficult for them to get the proper information to submit to the city.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've tried to make the licensing as simple as possible, but we've looked at it more from the staff perspective to not make it an overburdensome process on staff, because there's a lot of new licensing coming down the plate. So I think it's fairly straightforward for a host to obtain their license.
Perfect. Thank you. That was everything.
Okay, anybody else in 721? Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Mr. Tenazzo, regarding the application fees, are we, compared to other sites that are municipalities that you compared, are we in the ballpark? Are we under? Are we over?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, the last time I looked at this, I would say we're right on par. I think it's based upon cost recovery. I think we're right on par with what other municipalities are doing.
And this fee, is it good for 1, 2, or 3 years? At the application fee?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe at this point, the license would be valid for 2 years. At which point hosts would be required to reapply.
And my question would be, why 2 years and why not every year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we just felt that 2 years was an appropriate time frame. That seems to be what other municipalities are doing. 1 year, it's not only the it's not only up to the there's work that the municipality has to do on this as well. So there's certainly going to have to be some phase-in policies that we work out to make sure that we're not getting all of the applications at the same time so that they're all renewing at the same time. So there's certainly some of those logistics are going to have to be worked out, as well as the length of the license.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Is that it for 721? Okay. Councilor Gardy, is that it for your matters?
It is it for my matters.
Councilor Nero, you're next on my list. Do you have any matters left?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. It was actually 7.21. So
Good. Councilor Christian, you're next on my list.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to start off with 7.6, second quarter financials.
okay.
I'm going to direct this first question to CFO Shell. In the report, Michelle, you indicated that winter control is over budget, and rightfully so. And I know that, this fall might bring better conditions, but we're going to draw from the winter control reserve. How much is actually in the winter control reserve right now, if you can tell me that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian. I don't have the amount in front of me, but it is under $1 million.
It is under $1 million.
Yes.
I apologize for not giving you a heads up on that, but yeah. Okay. So then in other words, if things continue and we have a rough fall, it's going to be close.
To put it in perspective, in 2021, where we had minor winter conditions, it wasn't as bad. We didn't have as many events. We pretty much broke even for winter control. But council has removed $500,000 from the winter control budget.
Okay.
So when we have a bad winter, like we did at the beginning of this year, there's a good potential that we will exceed our budget. And that's what we're presenting in this report right now, is just to advise council there is a potential for this to happen. And Larry or Susan may want to add a bit more to that.
Sure. And to that point, recognizing that we did some cost cutting in that area not too long ago.
To Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I don't know much more I can add to that other than we'll hope that October and November, December are reasonable months.
Right. That's okay.
Have it in good authority that October, November, and December are going to be gorgeous.
Thank you. Maybe I can direct this question to CFO Shell as well. Under the CAO's office, they show a $12,000 expense for contracted services, and I don't see a budget amount for that. It looks like it's an anomaly of some kind, or was there a special occurrence that, we incurred this $12,000? I'd ask the CAO if he was here, but.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, my understanding is that is for consulting services for procurement of the new director of HR.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so moving right along on this, I want to direct a couple of questions to Fire Chief Johnson. I'm looking through the numbers, and I always look for these little anomalies or things that stand out. Under salaries, it shows that budget remaining is about 41%, where, we're 50% through the year, and most of the other departments are running around 50. So we're running a little hot there, roughly 700,000 more than last year. And I made an initial reach out to Fire Chief Johnson, and he gave me some additional statistics. In quarter two, we had 1,945 hours of illness. Given that there's 76 firefighters working 7.5 shifts a month, that's roughly 1,732 shifts in a quarter. 81 of them were call-outs for illness. So I know this is a complicated department, but the devils are in the details. I'm just wondering if you could speak to some of those numbers that I've provided, just to give us some context and frame this for us so we can better understand it.
Through you, Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I'll try my best. The largest percentage of the sick time that you're seeing are due to non-occupational injuries. We've had 7 individuals that were off either short-term, mid-term, or long-term range. So the short-term would be in the 30-day range, mid-term would be 60-day range, and the long-term's 90-day range. That accounts for approximately 1,680 hours, almost $130,000 of that portion. I don't know if that helps you.
Yeah,
see.
it does. And I just want to get that out because in looking at the numbers, there's, as I say, it's an anomaly. It stands out. It's an outlier. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that there's extenuating circumstances, but nevertheless, I don't think I'm doing my job if I don't highlight it and at least ask for the explanation that you provided. So I appreciate that. That's all I have on the.
Anybody else? Everybody else on 7.6? Anything else, Councillor Christian?
Yes. 7.13, skilled labor recruitment. I want to thank staff for that report. They know that I big proponent of these efforts, these marketing efforts. I read the report. It sounds very, very positive, but I'm going to harp on a familiar theme with me, and that is to try to get more specific details out of the report. And it sounds very successful. I mean, it sounds good. However, when we say that we helped over 30 businesses, I would feel a lot better if we had the actual number. I don't like using general numbers. So can you provide how many businesses were actually supported or helped? I'll send that, I guess, through to Mr. Ver, Mr. Lamb. I'm not sure who's going to handle this one.
I think it'd be Mr. Ver. So it's, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian. Travis Anderson is here and authored the report, but we can certainly look to have the exact number in future report. Our labor force development coordinator is working with a number of businesses now, and the list is growing to help them. And word is spreading, I would say, in terms of our ability to help them with the different programs and help them find skilled labor. So certainly we'll look to have that in future reports.
But do you have the actual number of businesses?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I don't have the actual number in front of me, but we can get that number.
Okay. Again, I really, really think it's important because it just lends credibility to what you're doing. It's not a complaint on my part as much as a suggestion, as a helpful hint that if we're going to use this information, you need to have that. And it also says that there's limitations in collecting data. Could you explain what those limitations are?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian. Travis, I think, does actually have the exact number, and he can provide some more background on the data.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian. As of right now, we've assisted 36 businesses.
Good.
The number increases on a monthly basis. Our support through RNIP is skyrocketing. We're getting a lot of attention this year. We have 125 recommendations available for us this year. We're already close to 90, and that's without including this next round that we'll be doing in August. In terms of data, just to answer your question, in terms of data limitations, it has been a challenge for us. We've made several inquiries through real estate agents to try to track information on new residents relocating. We've reached out to various larger local media publications to inquire about surveys. They did not feel that the data would be accurate for that. We've inquired with both school boards. We're able to get some information in terms of the number of new students, but it's difficult to draw out exactly how many are from outside the community. So we are certainly trying our best, and we'll continue to try to refine those numbers as we go forward.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I encourage you to give specifics, as many specifics as you can in these reports. It avoids having to answer questions during the meetings. And again, it adds credibility to what you're doing. And And again, I encourage you to, these are marketing efforts, and the best way to measure your marketing efforts is through data results. So the more information you can provide, the more robust your reports are, the more justified you are in doing what you're doing. Thank you. I think that's it for me, Mr. Mayor.
I'm just going to make a comment, Travis. I just want to make a comment about this report. Thank you for it. There is some specific numbers in here,
Yes,
Councilor Christian, that I do want to kind of bring to the community's attention. We had 218 candidates that we recommended through RNIP with 148 dependents. So there's 366 new residents to our community that we achieved through this program. And I want to point out, and I think this needs to be said, there are 11 RNIP communities. And Sault Ste. Marie was the first community to use RNIP. And of all the communities, it's my understanding that we have used RNIP to the most significant degree, and that our staff have availed themselves to it and helped more people through the program than any other community. And I'd also point out that we got on this years ago, and the last council got on this, and we saw these challenges, and this program didn't exist. And it was Sault Ste. Marie that led the way in pitching this program and convincing the Minister of Immigration at the time that there should be a program created that we should have access to. And this program is a pilot till 2024. In my opinion, it's critical that the program continues. It's critical that we lobby the federal government to continue the program. I certainly communicated that every opportunity I've had. But this was Sault Ste. Marie leading in Northern Ontario. And staff have done a tremendous job in actually seizing the program and helping our employers find employees. So I want to recognize that really good work, and I want to recognize the fact that not only did we lead in the creation of this program, we led in the use and application of the program. And I think both those things, to your point, Councilor Christian, should be celebrated.
Well, and I was just going to say that's a great preamble for future reports on this matter.
Yeah, sure. I think I would agree with the, to say we've assisted over 30 companies, they should tell you exactly who, because it's more than that. And I would agree that they're muted in the success of the program, and they're muted in their own hard work on making this happen. So that's why I wanted to recognize that, because I don't believe that RNIP would have came to pass without Sault Ste. Marie, and I don't believe that we would have been successful as we have been in using RNIP without our staff's good work. So thank you. Anybody else in 713? Councilor Hollingsworth and Councilor Gardy.
Thank you, through Mayor. Yes, this is tremendous. Two quick questions to Mr. Anderson. First question is, can you tell the viewers at home, how did you promote this particular pilot, and how did you get the word out there? I harp on this all the time, but we constantly sometimes neglect to use our media partners to really promote these wonderful programs. So how did you get out there to the word to the businesses, and how can we improve getting the message out there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. We've been quite active, both working with our local media partners and as well as those partners outside of Sault Ste. Marie. Because the program is tailored to newcomers to Canada and those overseas, we've done some marketing in the overseas areas, as well as in the GTA, where we know there's a significant number of newcomers to Canada first immigrating to. So we are certainly going to continue that in the future. We've got some great contacts. I'll just throw a plug to Mr. Mayor here. He did, in 2019, we went down and did a job fair in Mississauga. Our labor force development coordinator has wanted to move to Sault Ste. Marie since 2019, and we've now got her on board, and she has significant contacts in the GTA that's been quite helpful in terms of attracting newcomers to the community.
Okay, great. Thank you. And one last question. I agree with my counterpart, Councilor Christian. Gathering data is so important, really boiling it down so that in your report, it just highlights your successes, our successes. So here's my question. We have an opportunity coming up October 24th and our vote. Is there an opportunity at that time to put something on the ballot, or a separate piece where you can do a questionnaire where we're already having voters coming to these centers? Is there an opportunity to do a little survey? I don't know if it's possible under the Municipal Act, but you see it in so many other forms of elections where we ask that one very important question just to gather some data.
I think that question would have to be addressed by the clerk, Mr.
Okay.
Henderson. with
Then
respect.
referring to our clerk.
Yeah, you're talking about the election, so that would have to be addressed
Okay.
by the clerk.
Can you repeat the question?
She's asking if there's a way that we can use the election date to gather information, specifically what type of information, Councillor Hollingsworth?
Specifically to something that's unique to our community. For example, this particular skilled labor. Are you new to Sault Ste. Marie, as one example? Are you from within Canada or internationally? Something that I think staff might find important to gather. This is a wonderful opportunity of people coming to these polling stations to have an opportunity to basically poll and ask really concrete information that we are curious about or could help us.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, certainly we can work to have information available in places where, as you say, people are gathering, except that you need to be a Canadian citizen in order to vote. So for some of our newcomers, they won't be eligible electors.
Right. Maybe I misunderstood. Let me try this again. When you look at other elections like federal or even, I hate to say in the United States, they use the opportunity to ask a specific question that is important to their community, such as, do we need more parks? Such as, do we need more job fairs? Something that we just can't find the data, but this is an opportunity where we have a controlled group of people. So I just want to basically say, in the future, is there an opportunity that we can get out there and ask a specific question that could help us?
I think we'd have to take that back and consider it, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Okay. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gardy?
Outside the scope of this report, Travis, do you have a sense in how many newcomers to our community there have been? Like, I was in discussion with the Sault Community Career Center. It seems like hundreds. Accurate? Would you be able to elaborate on that at all?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, I would not be able to stand by the number because it wouldn't be supported with actual data, but I would agree from what we're seeing. I know last year when we ran the Adventure Pass program, which was only eligible for those individuals that moved after June 1st of 2021 and concluded December 31st, we had 40 families that just through that, plus RNIP, plus I know we've hired just in our space, 5 families from outside of the community that have relocated, and I know more on a personal level. So I believe the number is quite significant.
Great, thanks. I just suggest, Mr. Mayor, that maybe we reach out to the Career Center, who's helping a lot of these individuals settle in our community, to see if they could put together a quick presentation for council to inform the community. I think it's be a good idea. Thanks.
We can do that, Councillor Gardy. Okay, anybody else in 713? Thank you, Mr. Anderson. We've only got 2 minutes to our planning agenda, so Councillor Christian's gone. Does anybody else have anything on consent? So Councillor Dufour, is it a brief matter?
I can make it brief.
Let's put you to that. Which one is it?
7.1 streamlining development approval. Through you to Mr. Vare. I believe in there it talks about how consideration was given to recruiting engineering and building staff to help our current people out. It says that the barrier to that was the need to recruit permanent staff. Does that mean that we are recruiting permanent staff and not able to do so? Or can you just kind of flesh out that sentence for me?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour. Because of the limited nature of the funding program, in the time window for the funding program, we looked at a few different options. One was to, hire consultants to help do work. It was discussed looking at hiring staff on a contract basis, but again, it's a limited window for the funding. So part of the challenge would be looking at, how we could potentially use this funding to cover a portion of a candidate's time, but then it would, segue into a full-time role or recruit for a full-time role and have the funding cover a portion of that initial contract period. So that's something that we've been talking about with engineering in particular. A couple of the other roles we didn't think were appropriate, but that's something we are looking at.
Can we keep looking at that rather than potentially leaving money on the table?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, absolutely. We're looking at all options now to
to make sure we utilize all of that funding. And I would say that, most of the municipalities who have received that funding are in a similar boat, looking at requests to the province to extend the time period so that they make sure they can expend the full extent of the money that's been granted.
Understood. Thanks, Mr. Vera, and looking forward to some good news on that coming up.
Okay, so if anybody else has 7.1, I'll come back to you. Councilor Vazzawell, and I have you on my list for consent. We'll probably circle back to consent after we finish the planning agenda. So Madam Clerk, if we can move to the planning agenda, please.
Under agenda item 8.7.1, application A722Z at 625 Black Road and 1135 Second Line East. There is a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Christian. Resolved that the report of the Director of Planning dated August 8, 2022 concerning rezoning application A722Z be received and that Council rezone the subject properties from light industrial zone to medium industrial zone with the following special exceptions. That the required exterior side yard along Second Line be reduced from 15 meters to 5 meters, and that the applicant be required to landscape 5 meters of the city boulevard adjacent to the exterior side lot line, the details of such landscaping to be determined through the site plan control process. Further, that council deem the properties subject to site plan control and that the legal department be requested to prepare the necessary bylaws to effect the same.
Okay, Mr. Tenazzo, if I can have you give a precis of this application for all of the folks that are following us at home.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The subject property is located on the southwest corner of Black Road. Yeah, it's really what they're looking to do their properties to this line. Each would occupy about 1,000 square foot building for a third building for future health purposes. The recommendation is to improve.
Okay, so council, do we have any questions for either our planning director or the applicant who is present? Councilor Shoemaker.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just curious about the requirement to landscapes the city boulevard. Isn't going off memory, but doesn't it go sidewalk and then ditch in the area? Where would the boulevard be?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Shoemaker, this is a really wide
boulevard. So the boulevard that we're defining here would be, you've got the sidewalk and then there's a 20-meter boulevard between the exterior side lot line and then the southern edge of the sidewalk. And then the ditch is quite a ways from that. It's actually quite a flat area and there's a lot of area there that can be utilized, landscaped, and maintained by the applicant.
Okay, and is it typical for someone else to landscape the city's property? Like, is that a typical requirement?
It's, through you, Mr. Mayor, it's not typical, but what's not typical about this one is that there's a 20-meter or 66-foot wide boulevard between the property line and the sidewalk, and then another few meters until you get to the roadway. So it's an abnormally wide boulevard here.
Okay. And so if the boulevard is landscaped and maintained by the applicant, will the other 15 meters of boulevard be maintained by the city?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, general practice has been that it's adjacent landowners that maintain the boulevard that's in front of their property. So I think the expectation would be that the adjacent landowners would maintain that boulevard.
Okay. But the requirement to landscape is only 5 meters of it, not the whole 20 meters of it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Shoemaker, that's correct. So whenever we deal with landscaping requirements, we normally exclude the boulevard. And it's really, we're asking folks to landscape their own property. In this case, because it's such a high profile property, it's in a gateway area, and because it has such a wide boulevard, the applicants have asked not really to move the buildings closer, but to allow some more display space out in front of the buildings. They've asked to reduce that exterior side yard, and we've said that we're agreeable to that, but because it's a gateway area, we want to see some additional landscaping. And because the boulevard is so wide, we're satisfied to have that on city property.
I see. So it's basically replacing a required landscaping on his own property. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions from council for the applicant or the director of planning? Mr. Giomi, would you like to speak to the application? Okay. Would anybody else present like to speak in favor of the application? Would anybody present like to speak in opposition to the application? Okay, so we've given everybody present an opportunity to speak in favor or against the application. We've given all of you an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant and staff. We'll call the vote on the matter now. The vote's up on e-scribe. All in favor? The application is approved. Thank you very much, Mr. Gelmi. Good luck with your project.
And under agenda item 8.7.2, AH22ZOP 204 South Market Street, I have a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Hollingsworth. Resolved that the report of the Director of Planning dated August 8, 2022 concerning application AH22ZOP be received and that the application be approved in the following manner. One, that Council approve official plan amendment 241 by way of the following notwithstanding clauses. Notwithstanding the residential policies of the official plan to permit a personal storage, self-storage facility in addition to the uses permitted within the residential land use designation. B, notwithstanding housing policy H06 to waive the requirement that in all urban residential developments greater than 50 units, at least 30% of those units shall be affordable. 2, that council rezone the subject property from low-density residential zone and medium-density residential zone to medium-density residential, subject to the following special exception. A, that a personal storage or self-storage facility be permitted in addition to the uses currently permitted in the R4 zone. B, that a 1.8 meter fence in association with the proposed daycare facility be permitted to locate in a front yard. C, that the total number of dwelling units be limited to 376 units or equivalent flow, and that the legal department be requested to prepare the necessary bylaws to effect the same. Several letters were received and are on the addendum to the agenda, and the applicant is in attendance virtually.
Okay, so Mr. Tenazzo, I'm going to come to you first. You can give a summary of this application, and then we have the applicant present, and I'll give the applicant an opportunity to speak. We'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The subject property is located on the east side of the sofa, just behind the shop. The applicant is seeking house to facilitate construction.
The recommendation is to approve this application. And as you mentioned, Mr. Todd Liso is here to answer any questions and speak on behalf of this application.
Mr. Liso, did you want to speak to the application?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I would just first of all like to say how thrilled we are to be in front of you tonight to have this application heard. We've worked hard with staff getting it to this point. I wanted to thank staff for all of their efforts to date. We are supportive of the staff report as it is currently drafted, and I will refrain from adding anything to it because I think it covered all of the points, just to say that I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Okay, so council, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask any questions you might have of either Mr. Tenazzo or the applicant. Councillor Christian and Councillor Vezuelo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an exciting application. You know, the need in our community for housing is quite evident. My question, though, goes to Mr. Tenazzo, and it has to do with green space requirement. Is there any green space set aside in this project, or how is that handled?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian. So from a zoning standpoint, we look at green space just as an overall, like we deal with it as there's a % landscaping requirement and then a % coverage requirement. In this particular case, there are 2 outdoor amenity areas that are proposed. One's at the north end of the parking lot and one is along the south lot line. So in this particular case, there has been set aside some specific green space amenity area for occupants of this development.
So just to, then we're comfortable with the requirement that there is some green space, just to put a finer point on it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we are comfortable that the green space is large enough and appropriately located within the development.
Okay. My second question, I think I'm going to direct this one to Mr. O'Neill. And that has to do with if you're traveling south on South Market from Trunk, you turn right off of Trunk and you're on South Market, you can turn left to go into the mall, the new mall there, by the Giant Tiger specifically. Currently, there's no left-hand turn lane, and as a result, there tends to be a bit of a bottleneck if there's northbound traffic on South Market that prevents that left-hand turn. Is there any consideration given to installing a left-hand turn lane? Because I can only imagine that there is going to be more traffic coming out of that complex, which could make the situation for those people turning left onto Giant Tiger, it's going to be even more congested. Has any thought been given to installing a left-hand turn lane?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian. So you're talking about the entrance into the Giant Tiger?
Yes.
Okay, so there is a left turn, obviously northbound on South Market onto Trunk.
Yes.
To go westbound. So that turn lane actually extends further south than their entrance now. So there already is, if you look at the line markings on I believe they do extend further south than that entrance. So there already is I
recall a left-hand turn lane northbound to get onto Trunk, but I don't recall a left-hand turn lane heading south.
No, that's what I'm saying is that the northbound left turn west on Trunk already blocks that entrance. So when there's left turning vehicles waiting, there's no opportunity for a left turn into the Giant Tiger now. What they have done, what their traffic consultant has done is made, and that's outside of their scope of their 3 entrances that they looked at, but they have made recommendations, actually given us some suggestions on traffic signal timing for that intersection to clear that queue faster, look longer left turn onto Trunk, and as well as some modifications to pedestrians. There was some short pedestrian crossings on Trunk. They've made some recommendations that we have to go over with traffic operations that should help that.
Okay. Yeah. My concern is that increased traffic is just going to increase the incident of bottlenecking and the extent of the bottlenecking at that turn. So I said my piece on that. Thank you. That's it for me, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Bezuallen.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. First, I'd like to ask a few questions for the developer, Mr. Liso.
Yes.
Thank you for being with us tonight. In terms of your units, what is your primary market? Is it empty nesters? Is it young families? Is it a mix? And approximately in terms of the apartment building, what is going to be the mix in terms of like 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and what will be the average rent?
I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of those finite details. I mean, we are talking to several real estate firms and companies in the Soo to understand better the residential market. I think it will be largely market driven in terms of the split that we end up having. I think it's fair to say that there is a certain attraction amongst the seniors group for the townhouses, particularly if we end up going with a 1-storied or maybe 1.5-story design. I can see many of those being occupied by empty nesters or seniors. So we'll be able to cover that end of the market. And on the apartments, I do see some young families in there. We are going to incorporate a daycare into one of the buildings. And as I just mentioned, I think we're going to, once we get beyond this step, we're going to get into our market demographics and really come back with a package to take to the public to begin to lease the units.
In terms of the daycare, what is sort of the pre-planned capacity of that daycare?
Well, we have it set, I believe, at about 3,000 square feet, which is a good size. There are ministry requirements that I just don't know them on top of my head about the number of children per square foot, but it would be a good sized daycare with an appropriate outdoor space. The good thing about starting with a greenfield when you're dealing with daycare is that you're not trying to fit something into an existing building and then also trying to fit the the outdoor and the green space requirements, which are quite onerous, rightfully so, under the ministry guidelines. So it'll be a modern daycare with modern facilities and designed so that it can meet all of the ministry standards.
And then in terms of the townhouses, those will be rentals as well, not for purchase, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much. I just have one more question for Mr. Tonazzo. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Tonazzo, in terms of Housing Policy 6 since 1996, in terms of that 30% affordability for units over 50, how many times has that policy been put in place in terms of a development since your time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezo-Allen, in my time, it's been waived when it's come up. So I have not, in my time here, I've not seen it implemented.
And in terms of affordable, because it just says affordable, it doesn't have any sort of specific dollar amount. It just seems sort of in the air. In what, in your mind, is deemed affordable in terms of this policy?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, because the policy doesn't specifically define affordable, we would take the definition from the provincial policy statement, which is one should not be spending more than 30% of their monthly or annual income on housing costs. And then that's based either on the least expensive of either those in the low to moderate income brackets or 10% below market rents in this case, if it's a rental unit. So for us, it would be based on that PPS definition, which we do, as you'll see in a subsequent report, we do recognize that that is based primarily upon the missing middle. It's that definition is not looking at affordable housing for those that may be in the lowest income spectrum or the lowest income percentiles. It's really based at augmenting that missing middle who are finding it increasingly more difficult to obtain housing. I would go so far as to suggest that back in 1996, when that policy was put in place, creating 30% affordability probably wasn't the stretch goal then that it is now. And there may have been some developments where the market rents in and of themselves were affordable based on that definition.
Okay, thank you very much. And also in terms of the development, will the developer qualify for the tax rebate incentives as per normal developments? And can you please explain those?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have a community improvement plan that council fairly recently extended. So these types of developments, any development of 4 or more rental units, they do qualify for tax increment equivalent grants. So they get a grant, they get a rebate on the taxes based upon the pre-development and post-development assessments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tonazzo. No other questions.
Councillor Shoemaker, then Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Tonazzo. Mr. Tonazzo, the area on South Market and say within, a kilometer or 2 from there, from the proposed development, would you say it's mostly apartment buildings, rental apartment buildings?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, there certainly are a number of rental properties and apartment buildings south and southwest of the property. When you move east, you get into the more single detached residential. I believe that's likely why the overall development proposal includes sort of the apartment buildings towards the west of the site and then sort of transition down to the townhouses to the east.
But do the high-rise buildings, if you can call them that, the 5-story buildings, fit with the surrounding area in terms of what's developed already around them?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would suggest that the buildings are set back far enough away from lot lines. I think you probably got 3.5 to 4.5 story buildings, but they're quite a ways away from this. I would suggest that they do, just based upon the overall site layout and design.
Okay. And the report mentions briefly, there's I think an approved 50-unit building across the road, separate from this one, but is it unbuilt, but it's approved for, is it 50 units?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, there's an approved, it's 120 units. So it's 3 apartment buildings totaling 120 units across the road.
Not this one, but across the road. Okay,
Right.
yes. And that won't require any other council action for that to be developed if it goes forward?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so the zoning's in place and there's a site plan agreement that's in place with the developer already as well.
Okay. So what I'm really getting at is this development complements or is in line with what's approved across the street and other developments on, say, the south side of South Market or on Silver Birch, which is just across the road, really. Would you say that's accurate?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. And in terms of the requirement to waive the affordable housing mandatory minimums, I think you've answered, Councillor as well, and that's never been enforced in the 20 years we've had it in the official plan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it's been a little longer than 20 years. I think probably closer to 27. In my time here, we have never enforced it. Or I shouldn't say it's never been applicably enforced, if that makes sense.
It's been waived each time.
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, it's been waived, but it's also been interpreted that, it only has been applied to developments that required rezoning. So the property across the road, for example, exceeds the 50 unit count, but it didn't need to be rezoned. The zoning was already in place. So there are certainly some properties and some developments around town that have happened in the last 25 years that are greater than 50 units, but the need for a rezoning wasn't required, so it didn't trigger that policy.
Okay. And so we'll get to the other report, but going forward, if there is a development similar to this one, they may have, depending on what comes from your task force, they may have requirements that ESC is not necessarily going to be, is not going to have to abide by. Future developments may have requirements that ESC is not going to have to abide by.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, I think it's possible. I think the approach that we're hoping that the task force would contemplate would be one of incentives as well as regulations. And I think the arguments that we've made is that you can't require 30% of these units to be affordable without some form of incentive. Otherwise, it's cost prohibitive and you're not getting these types of developments happening. And that has its own impact to the overall supply. So I would suggest that future developments may be subject to different requirements or incentives for that matter that don't exist currently.
Okay, no, that clarifies it. Thank you. Well, those are all my questions. I just wanted to say I'm happy to see that this number of units is potentially coming online in the Sioux, and I think it's good for an area that's essentially already densified to be even further densified because it's a great use of existing space that's already serviced. So, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, through you, Mayor, to Mr. Tenazo. Safety is my top priority for our ward, and I know Councillor Christian talked about traffic, but I have received emails from families that have families that are on bicycles, and we know that Hub Trail is somewhat close to this piece of property. It's wonderful all these units are coming on, and the developer has said that he's looking forward to having families potentially move into this area. First question, when did this traffic study take place? Was it before Giant Tiger? Was it before Subway? Was it before Starbucks and so forth came in? Because those businesses are relatively new. And since I travel up and down that road quite often, I do see a large amount of traffic, especially bottlenecking South Market, as Councillor Christian has pointed out. So can you just give me an idea when the study was done, please? Or is it fair to say, was it before 6 months or just within the last 2 months?
It's a timely traffic study.
Sorry, the question was, are you asking Peter or myself? I didn't.
You can answer it.
It was done in June through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Hollingsworth. It was done in June of this year. I believe that the study was after the Giant Tiger site plan would have been approved. Peter could correct me on that.
Okay, so it did take in consideration the new businesses. Fair
Yeah,
enough.
through you, Mr. Mayor, the study's titled June 2022. I suspect, I believe it was about 4 to 5 months before then when the study was being undertaken, but certainly it was undertaken once Giant Tiger had been open already. Certainly
Okay.
when the study was undertaken.
Okay, fair enough. Going back to the bicycling, the hub trail there, and going through 2 emails from constituents, they're concerned again that how it's bent, the South Market has that curve. You can't see traffic coming around the corner. As you move forward developing this and working with the developer, can you somehow ensure that our children are safe? And can you somehow ensure that the bicycling crossing over to the hub trail, you don't have the answer today, but is there some way that we can make sure that safety is number 1 priority as we move forward?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, I believe those would be things that would be dealt with during the site plan approval.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. Certainly, the traffic study did look at pedestrian and looked at pedestrian volumes in the area and the potential for issues going forward. And the traffic impact study was of the opinion that the infrastructure that's there now is appropriate.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. But I do agree that bicycling crossing the street to the hub trail, there could be potential of a risk there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dufour, and then Councillor Hilsinger.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. My question relates to the functional servicing report. In your report, Mr. Chinazzo and Mr. Rumiel, it says, as a result of the recommendation from the Municipal Services and Design Engineer, recommended zoning will limit the total number of dwellings to 376 units or equivalent flow. Can you explain where this limit on how big this development can be comes from?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, there are some downstream capacity issues here from a sewer standpoint. And when the master plan for this area was done, this many units weren't actually contemplated when that was done. So there is, for lack of a better word, a little bit of a pinch point further downstream here. And that is why the engineering department's recommending the cap on dwelling units.
Okay, does this cap on dwelling units on this piece of property also affect future servicing levels for other vacant land that may also be in the same area?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, it could potentially impact significant intensification projects. When these types of things are done, there's always a level of error that's built in, or a certain amount of increase that's built into it. So, but a significant project that's significantly more dense than what's currently planned could certainly do that.
Okay, and what is a way that other municipalities in Ontario tackle these kinds of issues? Like, obviously, if we wanted greater density for Mr. Lisso's project here, we would have to undertake some form of infrastructure improvement. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, maybe I can answer that. So there is, as Mr. Chinazzo mentioned, there is a slight capacity issue on Boundary Road, I think going south in the sanitary system. There's a minimal increase to that, but still within an acceptable factor of safety, say. So we're not surcharging and flooding basements, but this is something we're going to look at in future studies. We are in the process of looking at a wastewater master plan, which we don't have a current wastewater master plan, and that'll identify this area certainly as one of maybe several that are in need of possible upgrades in the future, and look to finding ways to finance that.
Okay, so in the future, it sounds like we are going to need to look at not only doing upgrades in order to accommodate the kind of growth that we want to see, but having a mechanism to finance those upgrades as well. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, certainly we as the city is growing in directions maybe that weren't anticipated many years ago, studies like a wastewater master plan will help us to react and and make sure that the services are large enough and robust enough where they need to be.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Tenazzo and Romil. If I may, through you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Liso, would you have considered a larger size development had we had the municipal services to accommodate that density?
I think that's an accurate statement, Councilor.
So yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so Mr. Tenazzo, for these kinds of developments, the infrastructure that's needed off-site in order to accommodate our density and growth goals, how do other municipalities in Ontario fund these things?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, other municipalities would use things like development charges to fund these types of downstream upgrades.
So would it be accurate to say that our lack of development charges in Sault Ste. Marie is actually constraining our growth rather than promoting it in this case?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, in this particular case, yeah, the theory behind development charges is that development should pay for development. And without them, oftentimes you've got the taxpayer that's having to pay for downstream upgrades to support growth.
Great, thank you very much. I, for the record, support this development and happy to see it go through. Just wish it could have been made larger. Thanks.
Thought you were going to get there. I saw where you're going, Councillor Dufour. I thought you were going to get there a few questions quicker. Councillor Hilsinger?
Curious to Mr. Romil, what's the timeline on the wastewater management strategy?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger, we're in the process of trying to leverage the staff, which is another report that's on, that's one of the staff, the Streamlined Development Approval Fund projects is to get that going. So we actually are in the RFP process right now and looking to get that completed and paid for by the deadline of the staff program. So in very short order.
Okay. To Mr. Liso, curious to know, you have, it's outlined in this report that you would undertake this project in 3 phases. I'm just curious to know, based on what you know today, et cetera, how do you foresee those 3 phases coming out in terms of a timeline?
Well, we still have some parts of the planning process to finalize. So assuming the application was approved tonight and goes through its appeal period, our next logical step would come in for site plan approval. I think that the order in which we would logically and methodically develop the lands would be to proceed with the self-storage building, given the pent-up demand we have for that, and the townhouses, because it would be nice to get that in place so that the disruption to the residents on Boundary Road was the least that it could be. And then we would work westerly with 2 of the 5-story buildings, likely as a second phase, and the third phase against South Market. So I would say I envision this all being done in 5 years based on the 3 phases that I just said.
Thanks, Mr. Liso. And one further comment or question, and it's relevant to something Councillor Hollingsworth mentioned earlier. So with regards to the safety and the access to the hub trail, and Mr. Liso talking about looking to have families potentially living in this area, and there are already other families. I know we said as of today, the demand isn't there, or the infrastructure as it exists now, doesn't require any improvement in terms of these questions of safety. But in our efforts to reduce our dependency on cars and have kids ride their bikes to school and be more environmentally conscious and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, are we thinking about what it could be like when we're asking ourselves these questions, and therefore thinking ahead and planning how we can make it better, stronger, faster, safer for people in general and kids to use trails to get where they want to go?
So was that question directed at Mr. Tenazzo, Mr. Romil, or the developer?
Oh, definitely this side of the room.
Okay, so Mr. Tenazzo, did you want to start?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, we don't, Hilsinger, my apologies. At this point in time, we have to take what the traffic engineer is telling us. I think going forward, we need to have plans in place, and I think you'll see that going forward, we need to have plans in place to look at pedestrian. I think generally speaking, this site is very well served. It's got the hub trail going right in front of it across the frontage. Certainly there is a crossing right there, but once it's that one crossing and then you're back into the hub trail network. So I would say that in the grand scheme of things, that the crossing is actually quite minimal compared to some of our other developments that we see going forward, where folks are being asked to cross places like Second Line and they don't have that hub trail infrastructure. But certainly this is something that will definitely have to be looked at in the future.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, I have no one else on my list. Councillor Gardy.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Lisso. Mr. Lisso, your firm or the firm you represent in this development, do you have a history in building any affordable housing or any affordable housing be a part of any of your developments?
No, I do not. Then we do not.
Pardon me?
No, we do not.
Would you be able to explain as to why that isn't the case?
There's a basic fundamental economic problem when you start introducing these requirements, the affordability requirements, into the overall budget for the project. And I'll try and explain this. Absent some predictable, more or less guaranteed subsidies, we just cannot make the pro forma work to the point where we would be eligible for any type of financing that is required to build the infrastructure and build the buildings that you see. I think we've all probably experienced in the last 18 months or so the historic increase in construction costs and construction materials, and we can only reasonably predict that that's going to continue in the immediate term. And with the costs going up, to then have to look at the revenue side being reduced while the costs go up and no certainty of any sort of subsidy, it just doesn't work. I would not have filed this application, nor would I be speaking to you tonight if we had to abide by that.
Would you be speaking to us tonight through you, Mr. Mayor, if there was any threshold for affordable housing in this development? Say, I don't know, 15%?
Once again, absent, it is so thin today, absent an accompanying subsidy or serious serious economic incentive, the answer would be probably not.
As someone who has a history in development in this province, would it be fair to say that a lot of work needs to get done by the province in this regard to make it conducive for firms such as yours to include this type of housing?
I think that's fair to say. You just don't know what you're going to get, and when you're going to get it, and how long it's going to be there for. And that's just not the way that the real world works in terms of the financial aspects of these projects. Absent that line item in our pro forma, it just doesn't pencil, folks.
I appreciate your frankness. I'm going to be supporting this development. I also want to, recognize those people who are in attendance tonight who have some issues with it. I appreciate your presence. Housing is a very sensitive topic these days across North America. And moving forward, I think we really have to be conscious to some of the points that are outlined in Appendix A. It's hard to reconcile, providing addition. It's hard to reconcile supporting a mixture of housing types, supporting the creation of all of these different things, innovating housing design, inclusive neighborhoods, working to ensure that we have complete neighborhoods that we've talked about before. And then, a great development of this scale comes to us. We're essentially kind of unable to include affordable housing as a part of it. So there's something fundamentally wrong with what's going on here in the province. And I'm hopeful that for all the talk of sensitivity and the need for affordable housing, that something gets done that'll ameliorate some of it. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I think all of the councillors have had an opportunity to ask the questions they wanted to ask. There are a number of people present. So I want to, before I invite comments, I want to make something clear. This is on the planning agenda. So people that are here that want to speak in favor of the application will get that opportunity. People that are here that want to speak in opposition to that application will also get that opportunity. Waiving the HO6, which is the requirement for 30% affordability housing, is relevant to this application. So you can speak to it, but there's a separate agenda item, which is a separate report that planning has on about changing the official plan. So that's not what we're addressing in this application. So anybody who's speaking to this application, all I'd ask is that you keep your comments squarely focused on this application. And then the next matter, which involves the planning report about waiving HO6 and changing the official plan, because it is on planning agenda, you'll also be given an opportunity to speak to that at that time if that comes to pass. So with that noted, is there anybody present that wants to speak in favor of the application? Mr. Mitchell?
I'm not sure what I'm in favor or against, but I'm neutral.
Well, okay, so
I'm probably more in favor.
So we'll start with you then, Mr. Mitchell, and then if you can come down to the mic here and microphone, introduce yourself, and we'll start with you, and you can make your comments, and then we'll go from there.
Mr. Mayor.
Can you move the one with the red light, on?
Yeah. Mic, it works better, doesn't it?
That's right. That's good.
Okay.
There you go. There you go.
Good.
We'll catch you on that. Everybody at home will be able to hear you now, Don.
All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Mr. Mayor, city councilors, staff, you that do not know me, I am Don Mitchell, and I am here because I live adjacent to this property at 573 Boundary Road. And I'd like to make some clarifying points. Am I against this? No. Am I for it? In its present form? No. Okay. With some minor changes? Yes. I've lived with the NIMBY syndrome in this community and others for years. So I don't want you to say, this is because you have a backyard abutting this property. This is what it's about. It's about doing things in a proper manner. All of the area that I live in, and that the people in this area live in either single-family homes, 2.5-story or 3-story apartment buildings. To correct Mr. Tenerzo, there is only one building of 4 stories in the whole area. The rest of the area are either duplexes, 2.5 or 3-story buildings. When I moved into the location 30 some odd years ago, I checked the official plan at that time, and it was very clear. The official plan was going to have a property that encompassed single family, not single family, but row type housing, townhouses, and it was going to be 2.5 to 3-story apartment buildings, same as the general area that is there now. Okay? That was acceptable to me. I understood what was going to be in my backyard when it occurred. The other thing that was so important to a number of us that live on Boundary Road is there was a 35-foot allowance greenbelt against the Boundary Road properties that were going to stay as original. The taller trees, which would protect us from people looking into our backyard, and the garden area or lawn area from the back of the townhouses would stop 35 feet from our property, and the adjacent green area would stay. That makes it comfortable for single-family residents to survive. When the application came before me, I thought, okay, this isn't too bad. Okay, but you know what? Things multiply. Your official application, when it came to my house, said it was 280 units in the high rises. And somehow between then and now, which Mr. Dufour, you'd love it, it grew to 348 units. That's better than a 20% increase in units. Why is that a concern? I'm going to come back to what Mr. Christian has said and Councillor Hollingsworth have said. It's the traffic count and regulation.
The traffic count now, I shake my head where it came from. I drive this roadway on South Market 2, maybe 3 times a day. I haven't seen light traffic. It said very clearly, low traffic. Nuts. It's not low traffic. You have to understand that area feeds from the lower part of Queen Street, or the upper part of Queen Street, up Boundary Road, up South Market. It feeds up Chartwell, all of the area in behind, funnels out onto South Market. A question was asked by Councillor Christian. What about the turning lane at the highway Trunk Road and at South Market? Going south, not north, south. Because as people try to cross Trunk Road and turn into the giant tiger now, there's about 3 cars that can line up. And if there's more than that, okay, they end up going across the highway. They can't get in. I didn't hear it answered. What they were asking for is, could you make another lane on that side so cars can go around and allow that area to go into Giant Tiger? That was never addressed. Now, that's a problem. Somebody's going to get killed. The other area that really surprised me is it was stated very clearly, excuse me, I have allergies, so it's no cold and no COVID, okay? All right. What surprised me was the amount of traffic that's stated there now. Shocking. If they did a report like that, I'd be absolutely 179 cars are reported out of that place in the morning, predicted. 178 are going to return at night. I kind of like that because we're missing one returning. I go 179 days, I'm going to have no returning. Okay? We keep losing one somewhere along the way. But we've got 348 units without the townhouses. Don't tell me that only half of them are going to go to work. Sorry, not going to happen. Don't tell me that UPS isn't going to come in. Don't tell me that FedEx isn't going to come in. Don't tell me that all kinds of other services are coming in, plus visitors, plus people who are not going to be part of the daycare are coming in. Nuts. Secondly, you've got a development across the road of 120 units approved. Absolutely approved. Add that into the mix. Now we're up to almost 500 new units that are going to enter that street once a day, twice a day, plus all the other traffic that's coming. Excuse me, there is a concern. And that's my concern. It's for the well-being. Our city council over here is going to have to answer some of the things if we start to have multiple accidents or deaths. Let's protect what we have. I want growth, but I want it responsible. Okay, the other thing, excuse me, I get ahead of myself here. I've got to check my notes. My wife said, make sure you lead and don't deviate, but I always do. Okay. Oh, Mr. Mayor, you asked me not to speak to HO6, but I have to.
No, I didn't.
Okay, it's in relation to this development.
I was making that point.
Thank you.
It's relevant to this because there's a waiver on it, but I was asking not to speak to the
overall application
of the planning, the change of the official plan that staff is proposing. That's a separate report.
Thank you.
HO6 is relevant to this report, so you can speak to it.
Thank you. Again, because I've lived in this community, and most of you know, I'm passionate about the growth and opportunities. So I think this has been a detriment to the opportunities for business to develop. Okay, I'm pleased, okay, with what Mr. Liso is trying to do here. I understand it. I want it within reason. I'm disappointed with HO6 because, again, not to contradict what we heard earlier, but a development was changed and lowered in number of units and size. They had to give something away to get the reduction of HO6. So Did it dispel anybody from building because of HO6? No. Did they build it the size and number of units they wanted? No, they lowered it. I'm coming here to say, look, I have no problem with the townhouses. I have no problem with the 5-story building to an extent at the front on South Market. It's far enough away from the single-family units, but I feel sorry for the people who live in the 2.5 and 3-story that they look down into. But what really bothered me is they also said the 2 other 5-story buildings were going to be on the west side. Look at the diagram, please, because they're on the east side of the property. They're not on the west side. They're on the east side. They're not even central. Okay? So do I have a problem? Yes. The HO6, I have no problem with at all seeing it waived. But you are going to settle that, ladies and gentlemen, later on. I hope, okay, that it accommodates other developers. We've had very significant local developers have to fight this issue. If we're going to do it for an out-of-town developer, which is great, okay, then please, let's do it for our local developers as well. The one thing that I am asking for, I'd like a lowering of the 5 stories close to the boundary side of the property, but I can live with that, and I think my neighbors can. What I am asking for is that the city puts in the 35, which was original, 35-foot green belt between the property line and our properties. You allow us that original 35 feet with green belt with the high trees, we can live with what you are proposing. If you take a look and want to see what it does to help us protect, take a look at the Moose building that's on the other side of the property, adjacent to where the 120 units are. And that building is the only 4-story building. Look at the trees, it hides even from South Market. This is what we're asking for, is protect our properties from what we knew was there before. But please, please, for the whole city of Sault Ste. Marie, be careful of what you're doing here because of the traffic count. We have a tremendous increase in traffic. 120 units wasn't included, and 376. Folks, we're talking almost 500 units. I love it. I think it's wonderful. But the other thing is the optional turning lanes. The optional lanes are out the back of out the back of the property, coming across in front of the townhouses, and out at the east end of the plaza. Come on, folks. Take a look at that and see if it makes sense to you. It sure doesn't to me. And if I was Food Basics owner operator, I'd be cursing and swearing because it's sure going to interfere with my people. That's one. Secondly, why would you put the third exit is coming out the back of the plaza, again out to Boundary Road, but closer to the doggone turning point that's a problem? Why would you put it there when there's all kinds of service vehicles trying to service the back of the plaza? I mean, there's got to be some thought given into this. This isn't just an automatic yes. It's do it right, do it properly, and none of us here will have a problem. Do it incorrectly, and you're going to have a problem in the city. I ask again, consider that greenbelt, consider the traffic counts, and make a very careful and wise decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. So we'll give anybody else an opportunity here that wants to speak in favor of the application. See anybody else here that wants to speak in opposition to this specific application? Yeah, welcome you to come to the microphone, sir. You can just introduce yourself for council. And all I would ask that if you want to reiterate any of the preceding speakers' points, you can indicate that you agree with them, but please don't reiterate them to a significant length.
Message received and understood, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
I'm a little bit out of my element here. I'm used to being in a pulpit 6 feet above criticism. I don't think that's the case here tonight. I'm surprised at a couple of things. I'm surprised that one of the councillors, and I'm not sure, I couldn't tell from where I was sitting, which asked what the likely rent of the units will be. This is probably the first, he said he didn't know. This is probably the first time in recorded history that somebody has made a proposal of this size and doesn't have a business plan that includes what the revenue is going to be. I'm also surprised that it's such common knowledge that everybody who asks for a waiver on the 30% requirement for affordable housing gets it. Everybody gets it. That means when there's a development in Fox Run, the people on the low income end in this city get nothing. If this proposal goes through as it is, the people on the low income end in this city get nothing. Nothing. It's been widely quoted that the measure of the greatness of a community is how they treat the most vulnerable. And I'm suggesting that the people who are most vulnerable in this city as far as housing goes, and particularly with this development that's proposed, are the people on the low end of the income scale who can't afford housing. I did a little research. Actually, I was really surprised. I tried to research on the internet. Everybody Googles everything, right? Yeah. If you're trying to get some information about something, how many of you looked at Google first? Yeah, I see a lot of heads nodding here. I tried to get some information about ESC Development Corporation. It appears that Mr. Google has never heard of it. So I don't know who the principals are. I don't know what their financial situation is. I do understand that everybody who's in the development business is there to make money. And I do understand that putting in affordable housing is going to lower the income from a property. And I do realize in the real world that people who are making an investment expect a fair and reasonable return on their investment. What I'm not happy with is that every time this event comes or this issue comes up, that everybody who asks for a waiver gets it, and the people on the low end get nothing. A couple of figures for you. A single parent with 2 children would normally require a 2-bedroom facility to live in. A single parent in this city, the average cost of an apartment for a single parent with 2 children would be $950 a month. That's average. Now, a person on or near minimum wage will take home after tax and whatever other deductions somewhere between $1,700 and $1,800 a month. That means that they have to pay 55% of their income on housing. That's before they put food on the table for their kids. That's before they pay the electric bill. That's before the costs related to getting to and from work. That won't work. That won't work. There was a report in Sault today in June of 2021 that said 44% of rental households in the city can afford the average cost of rent. 44% can afford it. That means 56% can't afford it. 56% of the people are in a situation where they have to pay less than the average, which means when you pay less, you get less. And I'm telling you, I've seen up close and dirty in this city that there are some really, really substandard rental units in this city. There is some people living in really nasty circumstances, not of their own making, but because they're trying to get by on something less than the kind of incomes that most of the people in this chamber have. There is a crisis of housing in this city. There's a crisis in this housing all over the continent. But I suggest that one of the crises that needs to be looked at is the crisis of housing on the low end of the income scale. And that's where that 30% number came from. Now, 30% may not be reasonable. And I know somebody asked the developer whether or not he would go ahead if it was 15%. If I was a developer, I would have said no. Why? Because I don't want to put any affordable housing in there. But I think that if the developer went back to his figures and perhaps came up with some numbers like what's it going to cost to rent a 2-bedroom unit in this facility, that he could probably still make a reasonable return on his investment. So what I'm saying tonight to you is please consider that every time that this issue has come up before a city council, this city council and previous city councils, the people on the low end of the income, the people who are most vulnerable in our city have got nothing. And I ask you to please consider a way to make sure that with this development, they finally get something. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you, Mr. Tenazo, for spending some time speaking to me on the phone. That was really helpful earlier on. And thank you very much, Councillor Hollingsworth, for the time that you have put in helping me try to address the issue of housing in this city. I don't speak for the church, but I am on a social justice committee that the Archbishop of the Anglican Diocese has put together. I don't speak for that committee either, but I can tell you that this is an issue that I'm very passionate about, and this will probably be not be the last time that you hear from me. I thank you for your attention, and I trust that you will make the decision that is right for our city.
Thank you. Okay, so do we have any other attendees that want to speak in opposition to this specific application? I see two. So I saw your hand go up at the back, Mark. I saw your hand go up second. So we'll start behind you, then we'll go to you, okay? Katie, did you have your hand up? Okay. So then we'll go. Can you just introduce yourself for the folks watching at home and council?
Okay, my name is Sandra Houston, and I have just very small points that should be brought up. No green space or area for children to play in. Storage units, they're right across the street. Why do we need it here as well? Proposed design could have lights shining in our bedrooms. And with the parking at the back, that could be a problem because I'm a 2.5-story house. Where are the trees? Do you want them all cut down? We need them. We need the buffer zone. And they should not be exempt from the 30% affordable housing. And the most important thing is the traffic. It's already a problem getting into mall, Giant Tiger, entrance, etc. Increased traffic, increased accidents. We care about our children.
Thank you very much. So then we'll go with Mr. Brown and then Ms. Blunt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got quite a few comments, but I first want to thank Mr. Lizzo for, offering to invest in our community. It's a really kind thing that you're doing. And I'm speaking in opposition to this, however. The mayor mentioned earlier that we were a leader in a certain area. Well, we happen to be a leader in affordable housing requirement through the official plan with our 1996 30% requirement for affordable housing on large developments. And so it surprises me to hear that we have not ever made that happen, because affordable housing is a component of housing. We can't just have, unaffordable housing. And we can't leave that
attended to, as the previous speaker spoke to. We're actually a leader in the affordable housing requirement because on November 12th of 2021, Toronto passed an official plan amendment for inclusionary zoning, which is a requirement of affordable housing. So Mr. Lizzo could not build a similar development in various places in Toronto. He'd have to include affordable housing. So having said that, as I said, I'm against this because Mr. Lizzo is the beneficiary by coming to Sault Ste. Marie of not having to pay development charges, which you would have to pay in Toronto. He's the beneficiary of a community rental housing improvement plan, which is a regular 4-year tax incentive program where he gets taxes back based on the fact that he's developing in a lot that doesn't pay any taxes, and it's going to be increased to a massive amount of taxes. That is going to be like a massive tax incentive. He gets development charges, he gets a community improvement, rental housing community improvement plan. And now he's saying he can't sharpen his pencil enough without eliminating affordable housing, which, unlike the previous speaker mentioned about the people who are most downtrodden, this is something about the missing middle. That's what Mr. Tenazzo said. It's more about the missing middle than it is about the people we read about in Sault today who are finding it impossible to find even the most basic of shelter here in our community. We have a housing issue with the missing middle here because of the recent increases, massive increases of affordable housing. Our housing has increased ginormously, and we're hoping to attract, young professionals who are starting their careers. They're going to require affordable housing according to this definition that addresses the missing middle. So, yeah, we would love the development to go forward, but we're not. I'm hoping our city council will not do it at all costs, and specifically not at the cost of the missing middle housing development. As Mr. Tenazzo said, that is a specific number. It says 30% of your income or 10% below market housing. And so that's a specific number. We can look at our region based on census data and get the number that's 10% below market rentals. This gentleman is proposing an entirely rental accommodation space, and we all know that he's going to pick a price where he makes a profit, and he's going to raise the rates every year because he's going to be managing the property. As the previous speaker said, we don't have any sort of development history, and his ability to be a responsible property manager. So there's a lot of unknowns here. And as I said, we have a serious missing middle affordable housing crisis here in this city. And we should not be willing to give this developer or any developer, be it local or from out of town, carte blanche to develop unaffordable housing at the expense of affordable missing middle housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I think it's important to make one point because raising out a comment. No, Mr. Brown, you feel free to sit down. Mr. Brown made and Mr. Mitchell made. The policies apply to the developer regardless of where the developer comes from. So whether it's an in-town developer or an out-of-town developer, there aren't two different sets of policies or different plans. So it's not consequential whether they are from here or from elsewhere. We will now move to Ms. Blunt.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Katie Blunt, and I am here on behalf of Habitat for Humanity, a nonprofit housing provider and affordable housing advocate. I'm here to speak later on as well, but in respect to this particular exemption, I understand that perhaps 30% affordable units is not the right balance, but why is it acceptable to have 0%? I urge City Council to look at voting against this exemption and including affordable units, whether that be 30%, 10%, 5%, just having that affordable housing component included in this development is essential for our community and the health of its citizens. So thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Are there any other individuals present that want to speak either for or against the application? Yeah, please proceed to the microphone. And if you could introduce yourself, please, to council and the people watching at home.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for having all of us, Mr. Mayor, Chamber, and our visiting guests. First of all, I'm very ignited to see development in the East End. I've lived there since 1976. I'm south actually of the development that's going to happen. I also have some really strong concerns. My concern is this: people. We've got to back it up to what is the Soo about? We are the people. And we have a lot of people in the Soo. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that there's a lot of people in need. I'm lucky I can, live in my home and have what I need. But as I get older, I've got concerns also for myself and for the other people that are following us. So housing, number one, I just want to express my big concern as far as we definitely need housing, some sort of, geared to income housing for people that they can actually afford to live in their house. And I also want to stress how unsafe the road is in South Market. Now, I am south on Cambridge Place. Been there since, it's 40 some years. Okay. And when the road got put in South Market, I called that the 400. I still call it the 400. People are accessing that road now we've got Giant Taylor, which is wonderful. It's wonderful for the East End. All of the development is fabulous. The thing is, we just have to take care of how we move the people in, how we move the people out. And the whole East End of the city is accessed through that corner. So I'm constantly hearing ambulances, constantly hearing, fire trucks and things like that. And when I looked at the plan layout, I love the plan layout. There's a lot of things that I love about it. And like I said, I'm excited. But daycare center is right at a bend where we cannot see around the bend. It's scary. I come out that every day, maybe 3 times a day, in and out of the development. So I just think those things have to be really super looked at by everyone. Also, my biggest concern is it's 5 stories high. The building I should say behind me, heading north, is actually there's 1 unit in the ground, 2 units up. That's high. Now we're talking, a few more heights added onto that. So this is like skyscrapers in that area. I don't know if anyone else agrees with me, but it is like that. And it's going to be a big change for us. Those are a lot of people. So we have to, again, think of the people. What are the people going to need? They're going to need like a lot of green space. They're going to need safety getting across those roads. I've watched people trying to catch the bus when I'm trying to turn the corner to head north towards Giant Tiger as I leave my development. And I see women, children, people on bikes, everything. And I'm just glad I'm in a car where I can just maybe swerve or get out of their way. So already we have a situation. Please look at that. Please look at that very strongly. And again, I just want to say I'm excited. You've never seen anybody more excited to see something in that area. I was the person that back when that mall was doing nothing, I asked to put a coffee shop in there. And I was denied because of McDonald's having some kind of a guideline where, they weren't allowing people to serve coffee in, the mall, the Cambrian Mall. So, sorry, the Wellington Square, pardon me. So I guess in closing, I just want to say that traffic's a big issue. And one other thing, the storage units. I don't know about these storage units, but when you've got this many people, you're going to need a lot more green grass. You might want to even put a rink. You might want to encourage family settings, family getting together, people sitting, mingling, mixing. And the storage units across the street, I don't know. I mean, I never walked it out across Trunk Road, but it's not very far. Not at all. And this is going to be a residential area, you know, and let's just take care of all of our people, all our wonderful people that live here in Sault Ste. Marie that are going to support that wonderful development. Okay? Thanks for hearing my words. Have a good evening.
And can you say your name for the record, please?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm Brenda Brando, and I live at 40 Cambridge Place, like I said, for quite some time.
Thank you for your
Okay,
representation.
thanks a bunch.
So I think that takes care of all the delegates who wanted to make comments. Council, issues were raised. Before I go to councilors to ask any questions that might come of them, I'm going to ask Mr. Tenazzo. Mr. Tenazzo, there were planning issues that were raised. Those would be the only things I'd ask you to address, is just the planning issues. I heard issues with respect to green space. I heard an issue with respect to a green belt that would provide a buffer. And then really the big issue that I heard was traffic and the safety of people coming and going. If you could address specifically those three issues from the planning department's perspective or engineering department's perspective, and I don't want to limit you, anything else that was said that you think is relevant to address, we can address that and you can address that. And then if council has any questions arising out of the comments, I will give them another chance to ask those questions, both of you and of the developer.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just as a starting point, I mean, this is a big development. This is probably certainly one of the highest dwelling unit count that I've been involved in, probably top 3 in the 20 years that I've been doing this locally. So this is a big development. This is much needed housing. And certainly I would anticipate something like traffic and overlook would be issues. Having said that, I do believe that the urban design, the layout has been well thought out. You know, to transition to and from the higher density apartment buildings. Ultimately for us, when we talk about 5-story apartment buildings within today's context, that's a medium density development, and the overall development density of this site is medium density. I heard about a 35-foot green belt, and I've got to admit, I'm not aware of there ever being, whether it's an EM zone or a Parks and Rec zone that was sort of between the eastern end of this property and the backs of Boundary Road. There might have been promises that were made by previous owners, but I'm not aware of any zoning that was ever in place that would, you know, require this 35-foot green belt. I would suggest that we have 10-meter rear yards that would be applicable to this development, so that at a minimum, there would be a rear yard abutting a residential rear yard, which would be 10 meters or about 35 feet. From a traffic standpoint, certainly defer to my colleague, but we have, you know, the developer has had a traffic engineer look at this, and that traffic engineer has suggested there are no issues. Our engineering department has agreed to that. So I'll certainly, as a planner, that's a little bit beyond my expertise. I heard a little bit about certainly the overall affordability, and I know we're going to get there with the next report, other than to say I did hear about Toronto's inclusionary zoning bylaw. And I was told today, I haven't verified this, but I was told today that in Toronto's, and again, I don't really want to use Toronto as a good example for affordable housing, but I was told today that their inclusionary zoning bylaw, which is about that thick, would actually exclude a development like this. So it's over 50 units, purpose-built rental, and I believe until 2026, or they have a range in there in the city of Toronto's exclusionary zoning bylaw. This would be this would not be required to have those affordable units. Certainly there is an overall supply issue of housing locally as well as throughout the province and the country. These are much needed units. And as I think we've stated before, that the 30% rule is just cost prohibitive. And somebody had mentioned, well, then maybe it's 20, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 5. Are we going to start negotiating with individual developers to see where we're at? And in this development, it may be 20% is palatable, but for a different development that has different costs, maybe it's 5. Are we going to start negotiating that with individual developers? I don't think that's the appropriate approach, which is why, there is a subsequent report on here, and that's why it's being waived, because to get the equation right takes a lot of work. It takes a third-party consultant by Ontario regulation. It's not something that can be done in-house. You have to have the numbers reviewed by somebody, a consultant, because you got to get the number right, because you don't want it to be so high, such as now, that it could potentially stop development or stifle development. So it's a little more complicated than just trying to negotiate with individual developers the best that you can get. I think you have to do that. You have to step back from that and take a more comprehensive look at it. And it's unfortunate that we're having to waive these and that we couldn't have been here sooner, but this is where we're at. So that's why we have the subsequent report here. I hope I've answered the majority of the questions. I think from a green space standpoint, we heard about that. There are 2 consolidated green space areas that are on the site plan now. They are large enough to support the development, and there's a lot of green space and trees that are proposed on the site plan now. So I would suggest, again, from a density standpoint, this within the local context, it would be a medium density development, not high density. Thank you.
Hear that information. So we'll start with Councillor Christian. So Councillor Christian, I'd ask that you leave your comments and your questions to things that were raised after you had a first opportunity to speak.
Sure. I think Mr. Tenazzo has addressed, in my opinion, some of the issues. The original one that I started out with, and Mr. Mitchell raised it again, and it's that turn lane. I mean, we could debate about, is it adequate green space? According to planning rules, it is, and all of that stuff. But I'm telling you, I live in the area and I'm familiar with that corner, and it's not safe. And I agree with Mr. Mitchell. I agree with the other speakers. It simply is not safe. I've been caught in the intersection waiting for cars to turn left into Giant Tiger. It seems to me that although it would cost us some money, it's a relatively easy fix. Let's put in a left-hand turn lane. If for no other reason, we're supporting business development in the area. We're accommodating visitors to the mall, that strip mall. It's just making it more convenient. So I think by putting in the turn lane, we're going to help everyone. We're going to help residents in the area. We're going to make it safer. We're going to make it more amenable for people to travel into the strip mall to do shopping. It's just a wise choice to make. So I don't know how we proceed from here, but I would really like to see that left-hand turn lane put in.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I have 2 questions to you, Mayor. One, is it fair to ask the developer to comment? I know Mr. Tenazzo commented on the green space and so forth, but Mr. Mayor, is that appropriate to have them?
What would you like the developer to comment on specifically?
Safety, absolutely safety, and the green space. I believe that our constituents were also talking about the 35 feet. And those are the first 2 questions. Again, safety of our children. And then I have a second question about safety. And I do travel that every day. I cannot tell you how many times I've traveled that road, but please comment.
So, sir, do you understand what you're being asked to address?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. In what order would you like them addressed? Is it the screen space first and then the safety issue?
Well, take it in that order. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. With respect to the green space, I mean, there was a lot of thought go into the design of this development that you see as outlined on the site plan. And first and foremost was the notion that we were going to be sensitive to the single family homes that were along Boundary Road. And if you look at the plan, I think we've achieved that in spades. I mean, we specifically laid out the lowest density part of the development against the Boundary Road strip, for lack of a better term. And we did I kept hearing about 30 feet. I kept hearing about, like a number, I went up to as high as 50 feet. If you look at the site plan, at the most northerly end of the site plan, there's a 17-meter setback from our boundary, from our our easterly property boundary to the rear of the first townhouse that's marked as Unit A1. That just grows and grows till when you get to the southerly end of the property, it's up to 75 feet. And the intent there was to leave that strip of, or a strip of trees in place that would provide not only an additional buffer, a vegetative buffer, and then also the lowest density on the site as well as a buffer to the 5-story building. So I don't think we could have done a better job than what we did in terms of being sensitive to the units along Boundary Road. There is an enormous amount of green space shown on this plan. So when I go to the next issue, then the safety of not only the residents that are going to be in the development, but around, you will see that we specifically located the 2 amenity areas. And those amenity areas are going to be places where there's going to be areas where residents will be sitting. There will be park equipment. I'd like to do one of them with a skating rink in it. There will be areas for children to play. They are specifically away from the main access point and the consolidated parking that's in between the 4-story buildings. So they will be the safest that they could possibly be in terms of location. Once again, surrounded by green space. The daycare will, of course, the outside play area will be fenced. So I don't see the issue arising that was referenced by one of the residents in terms of the safety of the children being outside in proximity to South Market Street. And then you look at the generous buffer that's shown along South Market Street itself. Once again, it's ranging from 50 feet all the way up to 65 feet. That space will all be landscaped. So I think that this is not a high density site. Mr. Tenazzo, in my opinion, is absolutely right. This is a medium density site, 5 stories in terms of the depth or the setback from those easterly 5-story buildings to the Boundary Road properties. I mean, it is now going to be 41, 71, 24. It's going to be almost 90 meters or 300 feet from the back of those property lines to the easterly boundary of the 5-story building. So once again, I don't think we could have done a better job in terms of laying out the property, the abundance of green space, and the sensitivities to the local residents. Now, specifically with respect to the question of safety, I spent a lot of money here doing, and I'm not saying that in a way that I shouldn't have spent a lot of money, but we spent a lot of money doing a traffic study that looked at both pedestrian movements, looked at traffic movements, and took into account all of the existing developments in the area. We circulated the terms of reference for that study to staff. We cooperated with staff in terms of the items that they wanted us to study. We have a first-class consultant who completed the study, and it was submitted to the city for review. These aren't my comments saying to you that everything is fine and the infrastructure is in place. That's coming from your own staff. I didn't review the study. My consultants authored it. Your own staff have looked at it and said they agree with the findings of our study. I want nothing more than for this to be a safe community. I would hope that council, through watching what I've done on the front of that mall and the $20 million of private investment that have gone into improving that mall, you can see the quality of the type of development that I'm trying to do. That's going to spill over to these lands on the south. I don't want any issues here. I want this to be a good development, and I want it to be successful. I've always tried with this development in the Soo to do things the right way, and I have no intention of deviating from that. So if there are issues that council or staff would like to look into, I'm always happy to cooperate. I'm not the one who gets in the way. I would just ask that we continue to move forward. I would like to get going on this, and would ask for your support.
Thank you for those comments, sir.
Okay. I think it was important for you to say it yourself. I think Peter Tenazzo represents you quite well, but just hearing it from you, I feel strongly that it helps our constituents to know where you're going. But I also just want to emphasize that we need to relook at a turning lane, and I'm just going to leave it at that. And the last point I just want to make is I don't know how we're going to guarantee this as we move forward. But I know that in the past, other developers have had separate meetings with local constituents. So maybe hopefully you're open in the future to have a separate meeting with our constituents and have a more open relationship. And having said that, I know that our next item is going to be talking about affordable housing, so I won't comment on that. We as council believe in affordable housing, and thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you. I have Councillor Nero next. Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was asked and answered.
Thank you, Councillor Nero. Councillor Dufour, you're next on my list.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask a follow-up question of Mr. Lissow. Mr. Lissow, hypothetically speaking, if you had a tenant coming to rent one of your market units and the tenant proposed to pay for their rent with a combination of their own income and a portable housing benefit from social services in Sault Ste. Marie, which is a benefit that follows the tenant to spend it wherever they want in the private market, would you still rent to that tenant?
Councillor, I do not mean to be evasive in my response here, but I don't know at this time. We're just not that far along in terms of the marketing and where our rents are going to be at, and the price points for all the various units and the mixture of the various units. So, in theory, what you're saying makes sense, but I can't commit to anything at this point.
Thanks, Mr. Lissow. The point I'm trying to make is that there are other means for folks to have affordable housing that are not necessarily tied directly to just simply the same physical unit or the same developer in our community. And that there are other municipal means of subsidizing the way that folks meet market rent.
That's a fair comment.
I just wanted to make one other comment in response to one of the comments that was made about the City of Toronto and the inclusionary zoning that is there, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, and then we'll go on to Councillor Shoemaker.
Okay, so I'm looking at the bylaw right now for the City of Toronto. Inclusionary zoning for purpose-built rental housing does not go into effect until January 1st, 2027. And when it does, depending on the geographic area in Toronto, it is 0% required, 3% required, or 5% required. So I would encourage folks who are interested in inclusionary zoning and the possibility of having that here in Sault Ste. Marie to maybe spend some time on the City of Toronto website that they have dedicated to inclusionary zoning. There's some really fantastic information there that kind of shows the depth of work that's required in order to enact a healthy inclusionary zoning bylaw. And, you know, I would just also point out that this bylaw from Toronto is 12 pages long and our HO6 is one single sentence. So thank you.
Councillor Shoemaker, it's your turn.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Question on this turning lane that's been asked about a number of times. I understood Mr. Rumiel to say that there's a turning lane on South Market for vehicles traveling north on South Market, turning west onto Trunk Road. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor to Councillor Shoemaker, yes.
The traffic in that turning lane backs up beyond the entrance of Giant Tiger.
Correct.
So there's no possible way of adding a turning lane here because two vehicles would be colliding.
We would have to shorten the turning lane, essentially turn west onto Trunk Road, and then create probably a shared left turn lane, like similar you'd see on Great Northern Road, for that short section to include the entrance for the southbound traffic.
But if westbound traffic or traffic turning from South Market westbound onto Trunk were backed up there, again, it would defeat the purpose.
It would block it.
Yeah. Right. Okay. That the rest of my questions were asked. Thank you.
Councillor Vezel-Allen.
Just a comment, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. During all my high school years, I lived at 191 South Market and walked to the Dunn every day, and it was very safe and not the same type of infrastructure that we're having now. There is a need for medium density housing. We're getting a lot of newcomers coming into Sault Ste. Marie that need rentals. So I do support this development. I think we do need to have newer facilities for rent for folks that are coming into town and we're really trying to build our newcomers into the community. Saying that, we know that HO6 is broken. It's never been enacted, so I'm going to support the waiver in this case because it always has been supported, but I'll certainly have more to say at the next item on the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, Council, do you have anything else on this before we vote on it? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Christian.
Are we allowed at this point in our term to ask for deferral, not of for the developer, but for city staff to look at how we can widen that intersection to fit in a left-hand turn lane southbound on South Market into Giant Tiger?
So are you connecting that to this development? Like, could this proceed and then that could be a separate direction to city staff?
I want the record to show that I think this development is only going to be as safe as it can be if there's a left-hand turn lane. Now, if staff wants to walk away and say that we'll work on something in the future, for the record, that's fine. But to simply approve this in the hope that someday they'll see the light, I'm not comfortable with that.
Well, I think to be fair, Councillor Christian, there's a traffic study from traffic engineers and staff is relying on that. It's kind of dangerous for us to be giving traffic direction. If you have a concern about traffic, that can be raised, but I think that's a matter of you voting against this application.
I will not vote against the application because I think the overall need for the development trumps that specific intersection. Yeah. But I want the record to show that it's not safe, and I don't care what any traffic consultant says. I've traveled the area, I know. So my words have been documented, and I've said my piece.
You're on the record. So listen, before we vote, I maybe I should make some comments because I haven't spoken to this yet. I'll be brief on the whole matter. When I come to a matter like this, I read all the reports and I read the staff's advice, and I consider the matter and I consider input from the public. But when we're making a planning decision, you have to make the planning decision based on planning principles. And personally, as mayor and council, I believe we have to rely on the expert reports that are in front of us. We can certainly challenge them, we can question them, or we can not accept them. And if we don't accept them, we could have the right to vote against the application. I personally accept the information that has been put to us, and I believe the developer has good intentions. And I believe most importantly is that we need units in our community. Part of affordable housing is increasing the supply. And we haven't seen a substantial increase in our supply for a long time. And we've had a number of exciting projects that are going to come online, which I think are going to be good for an increase in supply. And I think that's also going to be good for our assessment base. And every year we struggle to try and make sure that our municipal burden, it's the cost of municipal services to the taxpayer, is affordable. And one of the reasons that's becoming harder and harder is we have very little assessment coming online. But I'm happy and proud to say that there's going to be some significant assessment coming online in the future. And to see a project of this magnitude be proposed, I think is exciting. I understand and respect the concerns of all of the residents that are in the vicinity, but I have a lot of confidence that staff will work throughout the planning and development process to address those concerns. And I have no reason to believe that the developer will not address the concerns. I believe that the developer will. With respect to the waiver of the affordability, the 30% threshold, I'm going to leave my comments for that to the next topic. But I would have a difficult time not granting the waiver as a matter of precedence, because I have supported that waiver in the past, and I think it would be inequitable for me not to support it in this case. Although it does represent a significant problem that has been spoken to tonight at council, and I'll save my comments for that next section that we're about to deal with, and I'll make them at the outset so everybody knows what I think about that in advance. So we can call the vote on this. The vote's up. All in favor of the application? Opposed to the application? So the application is carried. So thank you to the applicant for your time tonight. Thank you for everybody else who came out to express your opinions and your concerns. And we will move on to 8.7.3. Is that correct?
That is correct. Agenda item 8.7.3, application A622OP, Affordable Housing Official Plan Amendment. It's a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Christian. Resolved that the report of the Director of Planning dated August 8, 2022 be received, and that official plan amendment number 242, repealing the existing housing policies within the official plan and replacing them with the affordable housing policies outlined in Appendix A to this report be approved, and that the legal department be requested to prepare the necessary bylaws to effect the same. Further, that council establish a local housing task force consisting of relevant city staff, planning, finance, and building, DSAB staff, other nonprofit housing providers, and 2 members of council. This task force would be responsible for developing a local comprehensive housing plan with special regard for affordable housing and the missing middle, developing and recommending a community improvement plan to incentivize the creation of affordable housing units, and overseeing the ongoing monitoring and annual communication of important local housing indicators.
Okay, I'm going to ask Mr. Tenazzo to speak to this. It's Mr. Tenazzo's report. I'd like Mr. Tenazzo to give everybody the context of the report and why the report's before council. And then before we get into the discussion and we welcome delegations, I'm going to address it and suggest, from my perspective, how I think this should be dealt with. Mr. Tenazzo, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep it relatively short. I think there's been a fairly lengthy discussion on this, other than to say that we have a policy right now that we're of the opinion is broken. And the timing and the reason that this report is here, and it's been suggested that, you know, we're taking something away, but we're not really replacing it with anything tangible. And to that, I would say that you know, the proposed amendment is just a starting point, and it's intended to be a bit of a stopgap, so that instead of simply waiving these one-offs as we see them come forward, we're actually working towards something. And I do recognize that we need regulations and we need incentives, and we need to balance those out, and we need a more comprehensive approach to affordable housing. And that approach, we don't have that right now as the city of Sault Ste. Marie. So that's really the goal here. I do recognize that this is getting near the end of a council term. However, the timing is designed, and I do recognize that there's a really good chance that, you know, the task force wouldn't necessarily start until the new council, but we really wanted to put this out there because there are some exciting housing projects that are coming down the pipe. And I just didn't feel that it was appropriate for us to just be waiving them one-offs without really having a plan in place to deal with these in a better way in the future. So that's the context of the report. Thank you.
So, council, this was a substantial report. There's a lot of information in it, and I spent quite a bit of time with it and some time with staff. And this is actually the last meeting of this council before restricted decisions, assuming that we meet that threshold. And right now, currently, if everybody's registered to run, runs, and everybody who isn't, doesn't, we would be in restricted decisions as of our next council meeting. So to me, this isn't the matter of finishing something, which I think we should do. I think we should finish as much as we can from the 2 terms, certainly that I've been here, and would be supportive of having decisions in front of you that finish things. This is starting something. We're being asked to start a task force that actually wouldn't be constituted, frankly, until after the election. So I don't see how we could constitute a task force tonight that would work for a very short period of time, but not be able to return anything to council that we could ultimately make a decision on. Our official plan is 27 years old. We've been doing it this way for 27 years. It is not the right way, and it is broken. And I was glad to hear Mr. Tenazzo say that himself. We are not doing and approaching affordable housing correctly in our community, and we haven't been for a long time. And Mr. Tenazzo's been here for 20 years, and I think what he had indicated in his comments were that we've never applied the 30% threshold. So obviously it is not a good policy if it always is being deviated from. It's not a workable policy. It's not having a practical effect. As one of our speakers pointed out, there are a number of marginalized people in our community who are being left behind. So the policy that we have in place to try and address that isn't effectively addressing it at all. So this is an important issue. It's a critical issue and it has to be looked at. The way I think this should be dealt with, and what I have told staff, is that I think that this report should be deferred until the first meeting of the new council. And if I were on that council, which is clear I'm not going to be, if I were on that council, I wouldn't actually pass the change to the official plan first. What I would do is I would constitute the task force at the first meeting and get those folks to work together and come back to council with a suggestion on what the new affordable housing program should look like before you change the official plan. Because frankly, we've had the official plan for 27 years. I don't think there's any urgency to change it in the last meeting that we could possibly change it in, but it has to be changed. We need more units. We need more units to come onto the market, but we need a different approach to affordable housing. And I am confident the next mayor and council will recognize that and will work towards it. So what I would suggest we do tonight is defer this to the first meeting of the next council. And what I would say to them, whoever they happen to be, strike that task force as a first order of business and table amending the official plan until the task force can report back to you. And that task force can consult in the community and receive some advice, receive some delegations, and get some input and bring back a proper affordable housing plan for this next council to make a decision on. So that's what I think we should do. I wanted to say that off the outset, because if everybody agreed with me, then we wouldn't have to go through the process that we would go through if that's what we were going to get to in the end. So, Councillor Hollingsworth, you had your hand up first.
Thank you. I'll make one comment, but I just want to say, is it true, is it fair to say that through our term of 4 years, we have worked closely with DSAB to try to create some new policies with regards to development of affordable housing? And maybe Mr. Councillor Dufour can comment on that. Is it fair to say that this council does believe in affordable housing? But before I abandon that, I just want to say, I hear what you're saying, Mayor, and I support what you're saying, but maybe the mover and seconder could consider putting in developers. I think whenever this task force is created, either tonight or in the future, if it is deferred to the future, the new council, I'm sure, will go back to this proposed resolution. And I really think that we should include a developer or two developers in this task force as well, because I feel that developers are not saying no to affordable housing. I feel that they just want to look at different models. And I think we need to definitely include a developer or two in this. However, I would like to use this opportunity to educate the people at home in this council on how we as a city through DSAB have been helping with affordable housing. And if it's fair through you, Mayor, to ask Councillor Dufour to maybe make some comments.
Councillor Dufour, did you want to make some comments?
Sure. I was going to kind of, when I got my opportunity, kind of build on what Councillor Hollingsworth is saying. And that's to say that for my part, as the chairperson of DSAB, I feel like a lot of this conversation that we're having here tonight is occurring in a vacuum of like really substantial and accurate information about exactly what constitutes affordable housing in our community. You know, a lot of this stuff that we have done, that we are doing, that social services is doing, is happening in social services board meetings, not in this room, with the attendant differences in media coverage. So one of my questions, Councillor Hollingsworth is correct, and I'll leave my comments there with that, is that I agree with where you want to see this go, Mr. Mayor, but I feel like, especially with all of the community members that we've seen showing up here tonight, all the folks who've written us and expressed interest, I would hate to defer a task for 6 months and lose some of that momentum and lose some of that energy and the folks who do care deeply about this, because this is, to me, the number one critical issue facing our community. And so my question is, can we constitute a task force that doesn't have political representation at this time, that gives staff the ability and the license to begin some of these conversations with some of our nonprofit providers?
Well, no, I had that discussion with staff.
Okay.
So in our specific discussion about this, there's nothing stopping staff from beginning that work.
Okay.
And they don't need our authority to begin that work.
Okay.
So what I said to them was, like, you should make sure that you're in a position when the next council begins their term, that you could quickly equip that task force with the right people and the right information so they can move quickly. And it wouldn't be 6 months, Council before, because we have one meeting left at the end of August and we have one meeting in September. You're talking about the new council sworn in November 15th, I think. They have a meeting in December. you're talking about 3 months from now. And there isn't any political work that would happen in that time. So the staff work can certainly get started. It's my understanding that the staff work had started and that, for instance, the DSAB was consulted about this proposal that's before us today.
Yes,
Right.
and to that point, DSAB has a lot of the kind of numbers that will help inform that conversation already prepared and ready to start sharing with folks in our nonprofit sector.
Yeah, so that staff does not need our formal mandate of a task force to do that work. And in my discussion with them, the discussion was pointedly that the work should start and be given to the task force when it's constituted, so that it's underway.
Okay, so with the expectation then that staff is going to continue this immediately, I'm happy to propose postponing political appointments to the task force until such a time as the new council is constituted.
Well, this is what I'm suggesting is you postpone the full report.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you put we postpone to a specific date, which is the date of the first business meeting of the next mayor and council, which wouldn't be November 15th.
That's November 21. December 12 might be your most
December
appropriate.
12th. So it would be the motion would be to defer this report to the December 12th meeting of the City of Sault Ste. Marie City Council.
So I just want to add, I would like to see a developer, 1 or 2, on the task force.
You indicated that, Councilor.
I know, but I just want to hear a guarantee of some sort.
Yeah. Well, the next council might not guarantee that, right? But if you're on the next council, you can certainly at that time.
I appreciate that, but I just want to note it so that the council may refer back to our notes. That's all.
Councilor Nero?
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do agree with your comments and your path forward, and I'm prepared to move that deferral to the first meeting of the new council.
Can I have a seconder, Councilor Vezo-Allen? Do you have the deferral, Madam Clerk?
So this would be a motion by Councilors Nero and Vezo-Allen. Resolved that this motion be postponed to December 12th, 2022 City Council meeting.
All in favor? Carried. So thank you to our delegations. I expect that a task force will be struck. I expect it will consult, and I'll expect you'll have an opportunity then to offer your input on whatever policies developed. In the meantime, the official plan has not been changed. Okay, so that brings us to 8. Are we done?
No, we're not done consent.
No, we have to go back up to consent. So we're done 8 though. We're done all
Planning? Yeah.
Yeah, we're done planning. Okay, so back to consent. I was at Councilor Dufour. Councilor Dufour, were you done your matters? Okay, yeah. So Councilor Vezo-Allen, you were next on my list.
I just have one matter, Mayor, 7.2.
Good.
And just some clarification with Ms. Fields.
Yeah.
Or Rachel.
So to ask the question and
So in terms of the application, the applicants will be vetted first through background checks from police services before the licensing application would come to the city. I just want clarification on that.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezo-Allen, it's really preliminary right now. Essentially, it would be taking, because administration is shared both between Police Services Board and the lottery licensing officer. So as a broad brush right now, to bring that into administration and enforcement through the City of Sault Ste. Marie. So likely what it would be is the same documents as drivers and so on are requested to provide right now, but they would be bringing that as a package to the lottery licensing officer. What we do want to do is reach out to the taxi companies and so on and get some feedback from them in terms of what barriers are, so that we could include them in the discussions going forward as to how we structure that.
Okay, and I just want to confirm that there's not going to be any change to the bylaw, especially in terms of hours of operation in paratransport. Although the report says there's little comments on that. I know from the accessibility committee, we do receive a lot of complaints in terms of private paratransport and the inavailability of it for a lot of our folks that have mobility devices. So I just wanted that point to be known in terms of this moving forward, that is and continues to be an issue in the community for our folks needing paratransportation.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezo-Allen, we recognize that from your originating motion. We're doing some work in trying to figure out the best path forward in terms of enforcing that such that it's not detrimental to the other operations, taxi operations available across the city. But those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to research and report back to you.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Okay, anybody else on 7.2? Is that it on the consent agenda then? Councillor Hollingsworth?
Just really briefly, it's 7.12, tourism development. I just have a comment.
Yep.
Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Anderson, I believe, who wrote the report. I just want to say I'm really happy to see that we're going to be supporting at the conference with regards to wounds. And for those that are at home, maybe people in this chamber will know that Dr. Gary Sybil, has been coming to Sault Ste. Marie for close to 43 years. He doesn't have to, but he does, because we do not have a full-fledged dermatologist here in Sault Ste. Marie. So by helping this conference, and he initiated it, he's not even from Sault Ste. Marie. His wife apparently originally from Sault Ste. Marie. He believes in wounds. He believes in helping Northern Ontario. And by giving him this small financial, not just him, but the conference, I should say, this small financial support is going to be huge. The number of healthcare professionals that are coming to this conference who have never been to Sault Ste. Marie before is going to have an opportunity to see how great we are, and maybe potentially, who knows, may want to put some roots here. So this is a very good launch to healthcare and improving healthcare for our community. We're bringing people from all over Ontario, all over Canada, and actually throughout the United States. We have specialists coming, and this is something that I want to echo and basically give a big, huge shout out to Mr. Anderson and to Dr. Sybil and to Sault College. This is very positive. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in 7.12? Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Anything else on the consent agenda?
Nothing else.
Okay, Madam Clerk.
A motion by Councillors Vezo-Allen and Hilsinger resolved that all items listed under date August 8, 2022, agenda item 7 consent agenda be approved as recommended.
All in favor? Carried. That brings us to section 9, I believe.
Not yet.
Oh, no?
We've got the plastics bylaw on regular.
Gotcha. Yeah, 8.6.1.
8.6.1.
Okay.
So that is a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Hollingsworth that bylaw 2022-134 being a bylaw to prohibit the use of single-use plastics be passed in open council this 8th day of August 22. We also have an amending motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Christian, resolved that section 7.1 of the bylaw be amended to come into effect on February 8, 2023, rather than the current proposed date of October 8, 2022.
Do you have any issue being on the main motion, Councillor Shoemaker? Yeah, gotcha. So we'll deal with that then. Okay, so we're going to deal with the proposed amendment first. So we have the main motion in front of us. Councillor Shoemaker and Councillor Christian have an amending motion. Certainly staff, council, you can ask staff questions about the bylaw if you like, but as far as the motions go, we'll deal with the amending motion first. Any questions for staff on the bylaw? Councillor Shoemaker, did you want to speak to the amending motion?
If I could, yes.
Yeah,
Thanks,
go ahead.
Mr. Mayor. The amendment comes from discussions I've had with a couple of the independent grocer retailers in town. Now, I know that there was some talk at the last meeting of some of the national chains have already implemented plastic bag bans, or they've gotten rid of their plastic bags, and that's all fine and well for a company like Metro or a company like Loblaws, which has a supply chain and an ability to roll things out across the country a lot more efficiently. But for the folks who run the independent operations in the Soo, they buy their plastic bags, as I've learned over the course of the last several weeks, in 3-month batches, and they usually replenish them in the last month of their supply. So they've got anywhere from 3 to 4 months of supply on hand of plastic bags at any time. And so implementing a plastic bag ban in 2 months doesn't give them enough time to deplete their inventory. Furthermore, the federal government's plastic bag ban comes into the first phase of it comes into effect December 31st of this year, which is the limit on the import of plastic bags into Canada. And then from December 31st of this year, there's another full year for retailers to get rid of their supply. So December 31st of 2023, before plastic bags are banned from being used in Canada altogether. I personally think that's too long of a period. However, I do think that October 8th, which is 2 months from now, is too brief of a period to transition out of plastic bags. Like I said, it can work for a Metro or a Loblaws that has the ability to do these things with deep pockets. But when you're asking, RJ's or Pino's or the independent grocers, Grocer for Good potentially, I'm not sure if they use plastic bags, but when you're asking them to implement such a change when they've already put money out for a supply, I think that giving them the extended time frame to do it makes sense, and it goes along with the implementation of the plastic cutlery ban. That's the same date that is proposed to be used for both. So I do think that we have to have some. We have to hear and listen to the concerns of our local retailers and not impose a greater burden on them than would already be imposed by doing a 2-month rollout of this. So those are the reasons for the amendment, and I think that we have to be cognizant of their concerns as well as the obvious need to implement this for the benefit of the environment more generally.
So Councillor Shoemaker, so you picked February 8th. So we're 2 months away. And what you're saying is about a month away, they would replenish for 3 months, right? So we're far enough away that they doesn't seem like they'd be replenished yet. How did you land on February?
I picked just for ease of implementation purposes, I picked the same date as the cutlery ban.
Yeah.
Now, assuming someone put in an order yesterday for grocery bags, you'd be into November.
Yeah.
And the federal government's ban on the import of them comes into effect in December. So if you worked 3 months from there, you'd be into March. I thought February was kind of a sweet spot in between the federal government's ban on the import of them and when we were already implementing the cutlery ban in any event. So there was no magic to it. It was just a long enough lead time to allow them to deplete their reserves and some connection in some way or another to the federal government's path forward.
Gotcha. Thank you. Councillor Christian, did you want to speak to the motion?
When Councillor Shoemaker and I talked and he provided me with that additional information, I asked the same question. I mean, why are we deferring and why this date? Knowing that, several members of council were very vocal about implementing as quickly as possible. And I appreciate why they want to do it, the spirit of it, and I agree with them. However, I think we need to be cognizant of the needs of all. I think we're getting to the right place. I think it just, this amendment recognizes that there's some real challenges for some of the independents, and I think we're trying to accommodate it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nero?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I ask a question on this?
Absolutely.
To staff. Thank you. We have a question to Public Works. If the stores that Councillor Shoemaker is referring to, for lack of a better term, get stuck with these bags because we implement the ban right away, what options do they have to get rid of these bags?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero. The charity option would be one of the exceptions, I think, within the bylaw. There are several, but ultimately,
You will be seeing them at your landfill.
you know where, unfortunately, unwanted material lands
So,
many times.
I mean, if that's the case, I certainly will support the amendment to give them some time to at least people reuse these bags. They're there or they're going to land up in our landfills. I'll support the amendment.
Okay, Councillor Rooney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will support what Councillor Shoemaker has suggested regarding the date of February 8th. A lot of these independent stores wouldn't be able to transfer their bags to other grocery stores. The chain stores can because they're a chain store, but the independent stores would not be able to. My question is regarding the how will this be enforced? Like, does the bylaw officer go to these grocery stores? Who would take the question?
We got to legal, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni. We have a rollout option as well so there'll be a period of time before we will be enforcing, but it will be complaint driven, and it would be by our bylaw enforcement officers.
So if Councillor Shoemaker says February 8th, you're going to also provide a grace period past February 8th?
Yes, for fines and enforcement.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. So I don't have anybody else on the list. Do I have any other? Councillor Gardy, then Councillor Hilsinger.
So I think everybody knows where I stand on this. I brought it forward originally and it supported Councillor Hollingsworth when she wanted things expedited. I'm pleased that it came back at this meeting where we're able to make some sort of decision. I don't accept that these independents have or had no choice. I'm of the opinion that they knew this was coming for at least a year. And I know some of these people who own these businesses are very industrious, and I am sure they will be able to offload some of these bags, and there is a place for them to be purchased from them. You know, I hear I agree with Councillor Shoemaker in the sense that the federal government's threshold or timeline is longer than we'd like. I know that of other communities who have done this way before we've considered. I'm of the opinion that 2 months' time is enough notice for these businesses to figure things out. I'm tired of hearing about people around this table and outside of it talking about how important the environment is and then failing to act. And that's what this will be. This will be delaying something that we're going to do nonetheless. I believe strongly in both of the dates. I had asked that a portion of this bylaw address maybe plastic bags first. Staff was good enough to come back with that. I urge every member of council who has said things about, supporting the environment and being conscious of the Great Lakes and the ecosystem that surrounds it to not support this change. I'm going to be personally and professionally very disappointed should Councillor Shoemaker's change get the majority of support of this council. Thank you.
Councillor Hilsinger.
Councillor Gardy's comments, I would add that we've been talking about this and we were to have a bylaw in place by July 1st of this year. Many stores, small and large, have taken the initiative and undertaken and stopped using plastic bags before they were required to. And I think we just need to move ahead and we need to stand up for the environment. And I do not support this amendment.
Anybody else on the amendment? For my part, Councillor Shoemaker, I think I understand the basis for the amendment, and I think I would support it if it was a shorter period. But it's a 6-month lead time from where we are now. And based on the reasoning you provided, I accept it and I believe that it's valid and I understand it. But I would support an amendment that gave people 3 months or maybe 3.5 months to adjust. I'll say for my part, I think the city of Sault Ste. Marie historically has been an environmental laggard. I don't think that we have done what we have needed to do as a municipal corporation to be environmentally conscientious and sensitive. I think we've made some improvements on that in the last term or two of council, but I don't think that we did enough. And I think it's a legitimate criticism of the last of council historically here, that we haven't done enough to address our environmental challenges. And I want to acknowledge that. They're significant. I find myself thinking about them more and more and more as a father, wondering what kind of, environment my girls are going to have. If I could do only one thing differently, the one thing I would do differently is be much more aggressive on environmental leadership. So in that spirit, I don't feel comfortable giving another 6 months to this initiative. It's been something we've talked about for a long time. I think a lot of people knew it was coming and saw it coming. And based on Councillor Shoemaker's logic, which I think is sound, 3 months seems like the right period of time to address the concerns of the local business community. So for that reason, I would vote against the amendment. Councillor Shoemaker, you wanted to?
I'm content to amend it to 3.5 months from today's date, if that would bring you on board, because I think it'll be the deciding vote in this matter. So if Councillor Christian's satisfied to do that, I'm satisfied to amend it that way.
Well, it would, because I was sincere in my comment. So I would support the adjustment to out of respect for our independent operators, if it was in that time frame.
That by my count brings us to September, October, middle of November.
Middle of November. So we say November 15th.
That's as good a day as any.
Okay.
Okay, so what I'm going to do then is cancel this vote. So the 6 who have voted, that's going to disappear. Then I'm going to amend the amendment friendlily to November 15th, and I'll cast again.
Okay, all in favor? Opposed? The amended motion is carried. So the amendment's carried. Now we're on the main motion. Is there any discussion on the main motion? Madam Clerk, if you can pull up the main motion.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, so the amendment passed with a vote of 8-3.
8-3.
And I will just open up the main.
So we have the main motion in front of us. All in favor? Motion is carried. Now that brings us to item 9.
That brings us to 9.
Yeah, it brings us to 9.
So that passed unanimously. And under agenda item 9.1, Sault Transit Terminal, a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Nero. Sorry, I'm just going to, I think what we did. So we put the July 11 motion up there for your reference. And then tonight's motion is resolved that staff be requested to investigate the following options for renewal of the Sault Transit Terminal and report back prior to reporting regarding the 2023 budget request referred to in the July 11, 2022 resolution. 1, the reconstruction or renovation of the Dennis Street Terminal at its existing location to meet both the needs of Sault Transit users and the Sault Transit Division. And 2, the willingness of the new station mall owners locating the transit terminal at the old Agua Canyon Tour Train building and report to council on the outcome of those discussions or negotiations.
Councillor Shoemaker, did you want to speak to this?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to speak to half of it at the very least. No surprise that as I supported last year, I continue to support looking at the Agua Canyon Tour Train building, the old Agua Canyon Tour Train building in the Station Mall parking lot as an option for relocating the transit terminal if we are going to relocate it. Now that the bids have come back far in excess of what we were anticipating on the move to Huron Street. And now that there are new mall owners, and the previous mall owners had allegedly no interest in divorcing themselves from this Agua Canyon building, I think it's worth another look to see if there is any interest in the new mall owners to use this location for a renewed transit terminal. It's already historically been used to embark and disembark off of a train, so I don't see much difference in embarking and disembarking off of a bus. It's already laid out for a station, and it would just be a matter of whether or not we could, acquire it or lease it or do whatever we needed to do to look at that. Now, I had mentioned to Councillor Nero that I was bringing this motion. He also has ideas on what he wants to look at, but instead of separating two motions or having two motions at tonight's meeting on something fairly similar, I was content to work with him to look at additional options, which I won't speak to, but which is the other part of this motion.
Okay, Councillor Nero, did you want to speak to that other part?
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Yeah.
So this gives us a chance to revisit the renovation or reconstruction at the present site, which doesn't change my position on the last time we dealt with this issue. I still firmly believe it belongs downtown. I think it will fit on the property, especially if we look at the adjacent parking lot. I think it's a major improvement to the revitalization of downtown, reconstruction at this site. And most recently, part of an important decision to locate the youth hub on Dennis Street was because it was across the street from the bus terminal. So now we're going to move it. So I think it's really worthwhile and due diligence on our part to relook at this at reconstruction on the present site.
Okay, so I'm going to start by telling both of you what I think about this, and then council can decide what it likes to decide. Yeah. So look, frankly, doing either of these things at this point doesn't make any sense to me. I think especially with having no budget attached to it. I think if anybody asks staff how they can do this work without hiring engineers and architects to actually cost this, to do estimates, they can't. So you're telling them, well, with the exception, and I'll recognize you can call the new owner of the mall and say, hey, are you interested in selling this piece of property? And I'm sure if you call someone and say, you're interested in selling this piece of property, they'd be interested in having that discussion. But I expect there's lots of interest at the mall with the new owners and the activity around there. And I don't accept the proposition that, well, trains stop there, so it'd be really simple to get buses in there. I think there's a big cost to reconfiguring that and to routing the buses there and to turning that into our terminal. We've spent a lot of time looking at where Dennis Street and where it was and what the cost would be there. To redo that, I think you're going down an old road again. Frankly, one of the hallmarks of our time here together on council is when we made a decision, we moved on and we made it work. And we're revisiting two things that we've already decided we weren't going to do. You have a right to do that because we're outside of the year. So you can revisit things, whatever you want to revisit. I'm certainly not going to revisit them because I don't think doing either of these things in the context of all the information we have and giving staff no budget to possibly canvass them or address them is sensible. And I think what you're doing is actually contrary to what we want to be doing, which is spending money you don't need to be spending. And frankly, I think you're spending money in a wasteful way in this respect. So I'm not going to support this motion. Any other councillors want to speak to it? Councillor Vezemalo.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm of the same opinion. And to do a property acquisition, I think would be a waste of time for staff because there certainly is no budget. But I would just like to make a comment. And I really want all of my fellow colleagues on council to actually take the bus and go to the terminal. I think that's really important. 95% of staff and volunteers at Grocery for Good take the bus. We have a large population that I work with at the accessibility committee, on that committee that take the bus. So I would really like to welcome all of you to do that. And I think Mr. Lamming will remember when I was newly elected in the summer of 2019, I was taking Aiden to the bus terminal to meet his group through Thrive. And the drivers got very nervous as to what I was like, was I spying? Because the terminal was in really bad shape and there were maps that were ripped and there was weeds everywhere. So I think we take what we have right now and we improve it. And I wanted all of you to take the bus. And then I think then you have a better lens as to what the reality is of our folks that are taking buses in our community. So I'm not supporting this motion. I agree with the mayor, and but saying that, we know that we need to improve our infrastructure. So thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Hilsinger.
Going on.
Councillor Hollingsworth, sorry. I haven't done that for a long time.
I know you haven't, and others are. It's a compliment too. Anyway, I know. Yeah, it's true. Anyway, I just have a question through you, Mayor, to, I'm not sure if it's to Mr. Tanazo or maybe probably Mr. Vare. Clarification. For the new bus terminal, did we not receive some federal funding, or can you just clarify that, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. We were using the ISIP money, the infrastructure money, to fund that, but given the tender overage, we are now looking at reapplying and reforming that project to attract further funding.
Okay. So again, just another clarification question. Before, because we were going to get that money, we are obligated to build where the buses are housed at night. Wasn't there some type of stipulation or something?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, there was no stipulation. It was based on some analysis staff had done in terms of the operational efficiencies and some benefits of locating that terminal with the current bus barn, as we call it. And we felt there was a number of advantages to that new location that would be brought to bear by moving it to 111 Huron.
Okay. So conclusion is that you're reapplying, it sounds like.
To Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, that's correct.
And you're in the process of doing that application currently. And when is the deadline? When do you have to submit the application?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, I'll defer this to Brent Laming.
You, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, at the last council meeting, it was approved to make that submission to ISIP. So we'll be putting that submission. It's in progress right now to change the project, to close that off as a design build project. And then the submission to go forward for the new build is going to be going forth imminently, and then it'll be come to budget when the next budget deliberation takes place.
Which will be November or January, probably.
Yeah, because of the new council term, it'll be next year.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, anybody else on the motion? Oh, Councillor Christian.
Mine was just a simple question to you, and I wanted to know where you really stood on the issue.
Yeah. I have many faults, but I don't think ambiguity is one of them. Oh, that was it? Okay, so we have the motion up. All in favor of the motion? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 opposed to the motion. Motion fails.
Councillor Nero, you were in favor?
Yes, he was. It was partly his motion.
For sure.
He potentially had the most annoying part of it.
Under agenda item 9.2, I have a motion by Councillors Duffer and Vezo-Allen, whereas the Downtown Ambassador Pilot Program run in partnership between the City of Sault Ste. Marie, the Sault Ste. Marie Downtown Association, and the Canadian Mental Health Association has already shown signs of success. And whereas Sault Ste. Marie does not have dedicated street outreach for citizens who are homeless, mentally ill, or struggling with addiction, and whereas this population of people extends beyond the traditional boundaries of the Downtown Association Business Improvement Area. Now, therefore, be it resolved that staff be requested to prepare a report on the cost to expand coverage of the Downtown Ambassador Pilot to include the area from the Business Improvement Area through Jamestown, bordered on the north by the railroad tracks, and that the cost be referred to 2023 budget deliberations.
Councillor Dufour.
This motion kind of came out of a meeting that I helped arrange with some concerned business owners and landlords in and around the Jamestown area. Obviously, as Chair of Social Services, we've spent a lot of time dealing with encampments, with the visibility of homelessness, and with really trying to design the kind of homelessness prevention system that's going to really benefit our community and really help out our most vulnerable citizens. I think that as folks have been seeing the Downtown Ambassador Pilot roll out, It's been received very positively, much like the community wellness bus. These types of improvements not only are helping to serve our most vulnerable citizens, but they're also giving the rest of the community some hope that action is being taken. They're showing visibility on the streets that give residents in these neighborhoods a lot of encouragement that their concerns are being heard and that the city is taking seriously the problem that we're all facing. So what I wanted to do alongside with Councillor Vezo-Allen is really keep the ball rolling on this program. There's a lot of other neighborhoods that would really benefit from it and try to front load this into our 2023 budget process. Like I shared before, I think there's a lot of things that social services does that don't necessarily get the same recognition as things that happen around this table. And I think this is a really great opportunity for this table and the city council to play a role in what I think is a really successful program.
Thank you, Councillor Vezo-Allen.
Thank you. Very similarly to Councillor Dufour, a lot of the Downtown Ambassador staff are actually working within the wellness bus in that crew. I speak with them directly, and they expressed interest and need in wanting to reach out to other areas. And it was a discussion I had with Mr. Vare. So it just makes sense to kind of go where the need is. And we know that it is working. Also, both police services and our private security company are aware of the ambassador program, have their number, so that if they see someone in need and if they can't attend to them right away, they are utilizing that service as well. And I know the Downtown Association has shared the number for the ambassador program with the downtown businesses. So hoping that this can happen. And we are seeing some good results and some good collaborations from the ambassadors with other agencies that are doing that outreach and that frontline work. So hope that it can work out. And thanks to Mr. Vare and his team for helping coordinate this.
Any other comments or questions on the motion? All in favor? Motion is carried.
And agenda item 9.3 is a motion by Councillors Gardy and Dufour. Whereas Atomica has become a valued community partner, educational activity, and tourism asset. And whereas Atomica is active within the community through school events, virtual teaching, partnerships, and outreach. And whereas many families, community members, and tourists enjoy visiting Atomica. And whereas Atomica needs consistent and stable funding on an annualized basis to continue its operation. Now, therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to work with Atomica to determine the level of funding it requires, and then to assess how the municipality can contribute to ensuring Atomica has a stable and long-term future in our community, and to return funding options back to council for its 2023 budget deliberations, which funding options shall specifically include both levy and non-levy impacts.
Councillor Gardy and Councillor Dufour, I'm going to speak to this before you. I thank you for moving this as a courtesy to me. This was actually Madam Clerk, I had a second draft that I guess didn't get you, and it just said non-levy impacts. So let me explain this. The reason why I was explicit about saying non-levy impacts is I don't want staff to look at this and come back and say, well, we can add X amount to the levy. I want them to look at it and come back with different options so the next council and budget can make decisions relating to Atomica and have non-levy options in front of them. Because, you know, we do support, there's an ecosystem here. We do support a number of different partners in that ecosystem. And it's something that I think staff should be looking at and considering how we're spending that money. A while back when Atomic was here, was asking for resources, I'd indicated that municipal support would be, from my perspective, temporary. And, you know, I've come to a different conclusion since then. I think Atomica is a very important and valued community partner. I think that they have demonstrated a tremendous amount of value in our community. I think they're clearly now a tourism asset, and I think they're a big draw to the Bush Plane Museum. And speaking of the Bush Plane Museum, it was before us, and we significantly increased its funding. And we did that notwithstanding the fact that, you know, there's a large feeling that it should be funded by the province to some degree. As a matter of fact, our current MPP championed that as a city councillor, believing that the funding, and he was very clear in his position, the province should be funding the Bush Plane Museum. And I think to some degree, the province should be funding the Bush Plane Museum. But that's not specific to this motion. What's specific to this motion is Atomica needs support to continue operating. I've had a number of conversations with the good folks that are running it. They've been clear to me that it's going to be difficult to continue operating with its current level of financial support. There's been a lot of meetings with staff in Atomica, and staff clearly said, look, to support Atomica or to go forward, we need some direction from council. So this is the effort to give them that direction, but we won't be making that decision. That decision will go to budget. And I wanted to be clear in the motion, don't just come back to council and say, well, increase the levy by X amount of dollars and we'll give it to Atomica. I want them to look at the whole ecosystem, and I want them to actually give council some choices that are non-levy impacts. So the way I wrote the motion the second time was I just left out include both levy and non-levy impacts. And it just said specifically including non-levy impacts, but I don't think it's material. I think it could stay as it is. I thank Councillor Dufour and Councillor Gardy for putting that forward. I think it is otherwise very self-explanatory. Do either of you want to speak to it?
Just aside from the fact that, Atomica, more than anything, in my opinion, brings a lot of education and awareness of the natural world to the young people in the community. And it's enjoyed by people within our community and beyond. And I was glad to help you with this one. Thanks.
Councillor Dufour?
Yeah. I had some guests from Ottawa this past week who went to Atomica and shared with me that they felt it was better than the one in Ottawa, and their child with autism had just an incredible experience with the staff there, and they couldn't believe that we had such a gem here in Sault Ste. Marie. So good work to the people in Atomica, and hopefully we can find a way to keep that going.
Yeah, that's the goal. Councillor Hilsinger?
Question just around conflict, Mr. Mayor. When we're talking about Atomica, we are not talking about the bush plane or funding for the bush plane in any way. This is specific to Atomica.
This is just Atomica.
Okay.
But we're not limiting staff in all of the funding they're looking at. Like, staff's going to look at all of our arts and culture and funding. Like, they're going to have to come back.
Okay. I just want to be very clear. My sister is the general manager at the Bush Plane Museum, and I didn't think about that as a potential conflict in this item. So
I don't see it as a conflict. You have to make that determination yourself, but there's no direction here that relates to the bush plane.
Okay.
It's saying to staff, bring back some models here.
Okay.
Where council can continue to support Atomica.
Okay. I'm comfortable as long as we're talking about Atomica here. And if it goes further than that next time, then I can act accordingly.
You'd have to judge it at that time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mayor Christian Parazano.
Yeah.
I just want to say Atomica definitely has added a lot of attraction for our kids' education and tourism. And I know that many of their wonderful team members have come to us and asked for support in the past. So I am going to support this, but I just want to emphasize that as the staff works with them, please work with them closely on a sustainable plan. We mentioned that to them in the past, and we've said, we're here to help you, but I'm glad it's not non-levy. I think they need some help with a proper business plan. And they're great people, but how many times are they going to come back to us? Anyway, having said that, they're awesome.
Okay. Anything else on this motion? All in favor? Motion is carried.
That will take us to bylaws, and have a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Nero. Resolve that all bylaws under item 12 of the agenda under date August 8, 2022, save and accept bylaw 2022-143 be approved.
All in favor? Motion carried.
2022-143 was approved under regular. So that will take us to our closed motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian. Resolved that this council move into closed session to consider an item concerning the proposed acquisition of 2 properties and 1 item concerning labor negotiations or employee negotiations. Further be it resolved that should the said closed session be adjourned, the council may reconvene in closed session to discuss the same matters without the need for a further authorizing resolution.
All in favor? Carried.
And a motion by Councillors Dufour and Bruni. Resolved that this council now adjourn.